Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Zoom series, Trolleyology. I'm Kristen Fredrickson. I'm the manager of visitor experience at the Trolley Museum. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome back to everybody who we've met before in person, online. We really appreciate you joining us. This virtual series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics, stories of the trolley era, or our collection that you can experience from home, usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday based on our presenter schedules. And we're going to continue these as long as we have presenters. I'm working on the 2025 schedule right now. So if you have a show that you'd like to share that fits our museum mission, please let me know. That's anything about Pennsylvania, the trolley era, cities where our streetcars come from. And if you have something that doesn't quite fit those guidelines, please reach out anyway. And some of you have, so thank you so much. So right now, I don't have anything beyond this program on our website, but usually you can visit patrolley.org to see the full list of shows. And so when I have those, I will put them there. Let's see. Okay, and then I also want to mention, I really appreciate those who donated when registering for tonight's program and those who have made a donation through our website or the registration process this year. We really appreciate your support of our virtual outreach programs. And we have people from Italy here tonight, so it's amazing how far these things go. So for those of you who are new to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, just a quick little intro here. We were established in 1954 as the Ardent Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. The museum opened to visitors a few years later in 1963 and is actually located along the former interurban route between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. We've got over 50 trolleys and electric railway cars here. About 20 of them or so operate. And we're approaching almost 40,000 visitors so far this year who are taking the 4-mile scenic ride here at the museum. Okay, a couple things that are coming up. We've got Santa Trolley. This is our biggest event of the year. We usually get about 10,000 people between Thanksgiving and Christmas at the museum. So it's a great time. A lot of companies will have their Christmas party at the museum, which is so much fun. And I just heard that our young volunteers are going to be decorating the PCC with the lights again this year. So that was a huge hit last year. Our young people are so great. And along the lines of Santa Trolley, we also have a festival of trees going on at the museum. So if you are local and are able to stop by, we've got about 20 participating organizations, mostly local organizations that have sponsored a tree. So a lot of them are themed based on the organization. So for example, the Washington Symphony has a tree and their tree topper is a violin. The Wellness Center has a tree and their ornaments are like images of Santa lifting weights and working out, which is kind of fun. So come check that out. It's super cute. The trolley display building is really festive, especially this time of year. We have our toy train layout in there as well. Speaking of trolleys and toy trains, will be the first 3 Fridays in December. And new this year, you may notice on the left is an HO scale model of Skybus. So you'll have to come see that. I'm really excited. And we'll also have Steel City Lug, the adult Lego user group, will be setting up a display. And then our volunteers, Wayne and Nancy Young, set up a beautiful Lionel toy train display. It's kind of all different scales, all different characters. They have a bunch of new pieces this year. So we're really excited for people to see that as well. Oh, that's about it. Let's see. Oh, and then the other announcement I wanted to make is we're going to be open on Thursdays starting in January, which is new for us. Usually we've been Friday, Saturday, Sunday, kind of in our off season or non-summer season. So we're going to add Thursdays so more people will get a chance to come visit us. So starting January 2nd, which is a Thursday, we'll be open Thursday through Sunday from 10 to 4. Okay, now I'm going to introduce George Gula, who many of you have seen present before. I think the last one was maybe in February, but George grew up in both Philadelphia and Scranton, developing his trolley interests at a young age in Philadelphia. After graduating from Penn State with a degree in business logistics, he spent his entire career working in the transit business. first in Scranton and then in Pittsburgh, where he worked from 1975 until his retirement in 2008. He joined the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum in 1975 and currently serves as an operator and a conductor. And he volunteers in our archives with scout programs, and he gives outreach presentations as well. He's been writing for Trolley Fair, our member newsletter, since 1977. And if anyone here gets the Trolley Fair, there was actually a little Trolleyology column on the side there where it mentions that George Gula and Matt Non, their programs are like very highly rewatched on YouTube. So if you go to our YouTube channel and look at all of our previous Trolleyology presentations, the Philadelphia stuff is really popular. So, okay. So at the end of this presentation, we will have a question and answer session with George, but the chat box will be open throughout. So please feel free to enter questions and comments there. And we'll read through those at the end. And like I mentioned earlier, this program is being recorded and will be shared hopefully by the end of the year, pending Santa Trolley chaos on our YouTube channel. So everybody keep your microphones muted. And at this time, we're going to turn off our videos as well. We'll keep those off during the presentation so we can minimize distractions. I'll invite everybody to turn those on at the end. So if I come along and turn your video off, please don't be offended. It's just so we can all focus on George's program. Okay. Let's see. George, if you are ready, you can take it away.
Well, as long as can you hear me, first of all?
Yes.
So you can hear me. Okay.
Yes.
Now, I guess I hit share. I don't have the new Zoom.
Well, it looks good to me from here.
It's pretty good. Okay. All right. And I'm glad to be back again. I see a lot of familiar faces. Joe Blasha, how you doing? Phil Sauerlander, my old trolley compatriot from Penn State, a whole bunch of people. So welcome. I'm happy to be here. I did this show originally for the Hoosier Traction Meet, which the museum hosted back in May and June. And this is my home city, so I'm doing an entire history. It's going to be a bit long. If anybody needs a break, we can always do an intermission. We do that at Hoosier. You can see an awful lot of different people, a lot of books and newspapers that I utilize to hopefully get a fairly accurate history of what went on in the nation's first electric trolley system. And, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of the area because I know a lot of you are not from Lackawanna County, which is in the northeast part of the state. It's only about 40 miles from the Delaware Water Gap going east, and Binghamton, New York is just north of there, and south of there, only 120 or so miles, is Philadelphia. I took this just a few years ago. We were having a reunion, and it gives you a really good idea of how the city is nestled in a valley, and it's only 2 to 3 miles wide. This is where the Lackawanna River was. This is where all the coal was, and certainly the industry really, our prosperity was based on mining anthracite coal. A little bit of American history, because you have to understand, this was a very contested area. Both Connecticut and Pennsylvania contested the area. They had overlapping charters from different kings. The British and Indians also wanted the area. And so when the Connecticut and Pennsylvania people weren't fighting the British and Indians, they were battling each other before and after the Revolution. And here's a name we'll see later, the Tripp family, Isaac Tripp. He comes in at 1769. First 40 settlers are going to come into Wilkes-Barre, and they're going to settle along Mill Creek. The Lower Line crossed Mill Creek, and he goes 20 miles north. Who knows why, but he settles in what will become the city's Providence section. And although he has good relations with most of the natives, during the Wyoming Massacre period, he was slain. This whole mess is finally going to be resolved after the American Revolution. Pennsylvania is going to get the property, and you're going to have a new county, and it's huge, and it's called Luzerne County, and Scranton is at that point located in Luzerne County. In fact, there's 7 different counties. And there's Isaac Tripp sitting up in Providence, and it's not growing very much. It's quite a bit of scrub, quite a bit of a swamp there, and eventually you'll get four very sparsely populated boroughs. The borough of Scranton, Dunmore, which is still an independent area, Hyde Park, and the Providence section. It's all sitting along the Lackawanna River. This isn't Lackawanna, this is Roaring Brook. By 1788, it's a fast Roaring Brook's a very fast stream. And this area had a few houses, and it was called a variety of things: Deep Hollow, Dark Hollow, and my favorite is Skunk's Misery. Don't ask me where that comes from. I don't know. But just before 1800, Ebenezer Slocum is going to buy the mill, and he's going to add a sawmill. He's going to add a brewery, blacksmith shop, and some other industries. And because Slocum bought it, it's now called Slocum's Hollow. This is a map of the entire Luzerne County, and if you see that red boundary, that's what becomes Lackawanna County. You can see how far north people are, and if you can see my mouse, Wilkes-Barre is down in here, and that's the county seat, and that's where all the business is taken care of. That's where you go when you have court issues. So as early as 1839, people in this northern area were clamoring for new county. Now, Luzerne was very reluctant to give that up because they knew about the anthracite coal, and they knew the financial gain they could get from all of the mining that they hoped would occur. And you're not going to get a new county until 1874. At that point, the state omits a provision when they're coming up with a new constitution that says the majority of everybody's in the divided county has to vote. So finally, you have Lackawanna County. Here's the industry beginning, also in 1839. Blast furnaces are there. And of course, furnaces were a part of early Pennsylvania. This is along Roaring Brook. You can see some of that. This part of the blast furnace here between the two buildings is still there. And for about 8 years, this enterprise just teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. There was just a ton of problems involved in trying to produce things. Then in 1848, with the new New York and Erie, which will become the Erie Railroad, starting to build, they need T-rail. And they build a new rolling mill here, and they successfully fulfill that contract. That's the first T-rail to be mass produced in the country. This is looking up at Roaring Brook, and now we're off and running. We're looking at Scranton from the Hyde Park section of the west side, and certainly more track here today. But 1853, the company buys these two small railroads, the Delaware and Western, which is running north towards New York, and the Delaware and Cobb's Gap. That was chartered in 1850, and they're heading to the Delaware, and they are merged, and they become the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, which of course is the route of Phoebe Snow. And this looks like Pittsburgh, but it's not. It's the steel mill that grows up along Roaring Brook, the Lackawanna Iron and Coal Company. By 1880, it's the second largest steel producer outside of U.S. Steel. And in 1891, Scranton Steel, it's another steel company in the south side, merges with the Lackawanna Iron and Coal. They have a $1.2 million merger debt, and they get rid of it in a year. They're so successful. Of course, this is an anthracite coal breaker. A ton of anthracite breakers were there, and that pile of debris is actually scrap coal that was too small to fit the grates of the stoves that were in existence at the time. So a lot of slate in there, and a lot of people would go onto these dumps, as we call them, to pick coal. That was a cheap way of heating your house. Everybody knew about what they called stone coal, which is only up in the northeast part of the state. And finally, this Judge Jesse Fell in 1808 figured out how to ignite anthracite. Anthracite is pure carbon. It was very difficult to ignite. He figured out how to get the air in motion to get that heat going. These are all over the place. Wooden breakers for the most part, and eventually some steel ones. And the coal industry is starting off, and there's really no money in this country. And guess where the money comes from? Yeah, we all think it's Great Britain, but where does Britain get the money? Well, they get opium from India, they sell it to China, and they get silver for that. And then the British banks invested in American railroads and canals and other industries, including the anthracite industry. It's tough work underground. There's sometimes 4 or 5 levels of this coal being mined. You reach it by elevator. It's not soft, and you can see how tough it is. And you're sometimes down on your knees trying to get this. More breakers are built up and down. More coal is being discovered. Of course, the employment continues. This is Bellevue Breaker, not too far from where I grew up. I used to play in what was left of it. Don't tell my parents, even though they're not around. This is Oliphant, and just to show you, here's one of the steel breakers, and that's north of Scranton. Look at that big pile of debris behind the breaker. Eventually, these would all be taken down, and they would be pumped into the mines as a slurry by Governor Scranton to hold up the ground, which was starting to fall in. So here you are, Scranton in 1850, only 7,000 and some people. By 1880, you have 51,000, and the majority is German and English and Welsh and eventually Irish. These people have mined coal in the old country, and they're experts at it. In fact, Hyde Park becomes known as the Welsh capital of the nation. So many Welsh people live in Hyde Park. Here's the city flag. It's going to become a city, Scranton, in July of 1866. And as I said, it'll comprise Scranton, Providence, and Hyde Park boroughs with 10,000 residents. And Dunmore said no, and it's still an independent area. Some of you might recognize this building. And if I play the beginning music of The Office, yeah, you will. But what was this building eventually? And the other buildings? Well, this was the Dixon Manufacturing Company. The building was built in 1878. It made steam engines for the mines and other industrial machinery for the area. The company was founded in 1856. And yes, the building still houses a paper company, but no, it's not Dunder Mifflin. Silk mills, the silk industry moved from New Jersey into Scranton, and it was a logical thing, because with the miners and their sons down in the mines, well, you had plenty of women and young girls, and they would work in these silk mills, and Scranton Lace was one of the places. This was Sequoia. There's Scranton Lace there, in fact, and I mean, this is a typical neighborhood. Look at 2 mine breakers flanking the Lace Company in the background. There's that pile of culm again, which is everywhere, and people lived all around this. Now, we're finally getting to something on the tracks, mid-1860s. We have a bunch of boroughs, and they're starting to fill in between. It's becoming a cohesive unit, and they have the typical roads of the period. You either walk or you bump along on a wagon, and you needed another better form of transportation, and we get it. People's Street Railway of Luzerne County is chartered March 23rd, 1865. And that line opens on July 4th in 1867. And this is typical horse car. There's the Forest House, which was at that point quite a fancy hotel, built in 1855. That was demolished in 1894. It makes way for an even bigger hotel, the Hotel German. Now we're looking down Lackawanna Avenue, or down Wyoming Avenue, south towards Lackawanna. And there's that word trip again, because Ira Tripp is a director. He's a descendant of Isaac. He owns a pile of land up in the Providence Road area, and he wants to develop that area. So here's the first line. And, leaving downtown is Lackawanna at Franklin. And it's going to run up Wyoming, and it's going to run over Spruce Street, now Joe Biden Street. And it will cross the Lackawanna River at Carbon. And here's Providence area here. And this is all Providence Road, except for this little section up here, which is North Main Avenue. Typical horse car of the period. And I see Hyde Park on it. So that means it was taken after they opened up the bridge west of downtown over the Lackawanna River. March 27th, 1866. Now we have another railway, the Scranton and Providence Passenger Railway. It wants to go to Providence too, but it wants to go north through the Green Ridge neighborhood, another neighborhood that will develop into quite an elite place. And it opens up in May of 1866. So here's a nice drawing of downtown. It's passing the Valley House. Over to my right would be the D&W station that was there at that time. And later on, farther up, about 1908 or so, they'll build the big station that's finally there. Here's that line. And so here was the Providence area. Here's Greenridge, right in here. And it was supposed to go up to Market Street and then head up over the river and up a fairly steep, but not too long hill. It never did that. It just made it to Sanderson Avenue. This area, it was not on the railroad, but it paralleled the railroad, and this is 1866. Now, I know where this is. Most people don't. This is Cliff Street. Before you had the bridge over the Lackawanna River, everybody had to go up this street. And as you could see, it was not an easy thing to do if you were trying to run a horse car line. This is the Delaware and Hudson Railroad here. Also coming from Hyde Park off to my left, you went up another hill or down another hill. And anybody has been to the Electric City Trolley Museum, well, it's up above the hill on your right. They're going to open up the first bridge in 1887 in the late summer, in August. And this bridge is here. Here's Lackawanna Avenue. You can see me. The wooden bridge here is going to get you over to Hyde Park, which is off to my left. You can see downtown. This building here is the Jersey Central Station. So we're really concentrating. This is the People's Railway, only of Luzerne County. Yes, we're in Lackawanna, but it wasn't Lackawanna County when it was chartered. And it's going to go up the hill, up Lackawanna Avenue, up Robinson Street and 9th, and end up at Main Avenue. Very busy road even today. Here's the terminus of that. And everybody would have to walk to the car. You can see they've already taken the horses from one end to the other, and they're getting ready to go down the hill. Well, that wooden bridge was too light, and it was always in need of repair, so they replaced it with a steel bridge. And then this bridge always became in need of repair. So I don't know what it is with Scranton bridges. The Jersey Central over on your left would replace the span over its tracks. So I guess it was concerned. The city owned the span over the river and the D&H Railroad on my right, and it would eventually replace it, but it wouldn't do that till close to the turn of the century. And we're looking at it from another direction. We're looking south, and if you take a look at all these buildings here on the left are gone. That was Scranton's wholesale block. I'm looking for the D&H Railroad. This is the Jersey Central and O&W. There's a streetcar on the bridge right here. So, and some of these buildings go 4 stories down to the tracks. May 1868. Well, the People's Street Railway purchases the Scranton and Providence Passenger Railway. They merge. And so we're kind of looking at it, Wyoming Avenue during the 1870s. The wholesale block was off to my right, and everything was starting to shift left or east in building up. So now you have a street railway system that looks like this. It comprises all of the tracks that we've talked about so far to Hyde Park, Providence, and the Green Ridge section in Sanderson Avenue. And we're going to add something else. Look down in the bottom of the map, and they're going to extend the line into Dunmore, along Madison and along private right-of-way, eventually Quincy Avenue, up on Poplar, which will remain private right-of-way forever, it seems, and then off on Blakely Street to Drinker. Now down here, this operation down on Butler and Cherry Street was requested by the Gravity Railroad, which had its operations down here, and this would become the Erie Railroad Shop. And it's now the Naples, and they have a lot of scrap cars there. But at the foot of the Gravity Railroad, that was the foot of number 6 plane, employees can get to work as well as people who wanted to get onto Gravity and either go all the way to Hawley, Pennsylvania, or some intermediate stations. So the line going down here to Butler and Cherry became known as number 6. And I always wondered why the buses were called number 6. And now I know. This building being constructed over here in front of the church is the second Linden Street stable. It was 68 by 170 foot brick, had the offices and card storage and stables on the first floor. We had bedrooms for drivers on the second floor, and you could put hay up in there too. And the original barn replaced 4 different stables in different parts of the city, and that burned in 1891. And that was a real tragedy, I'm sure, because all of the paperwork of the company up to that time was there, including the original records of the electrification. And I don't know what kind of pictures was in there, but this edifice replaced it. There is a shot of Lackawanna Avenue I happened to pick up on eBay, and I thought that was pretty good. And I'm trying to read a little bit of the headways up here, but Kristen Zoom's got that stuff up here. I can move it. That's so wonderful. And take a look at 1878. Over 235,000 people are being carried each year. And this is horsecar service. So we're running between 1 hour and 1 hour and 20 or 30 minutes. So, that's kind of headway. And they run from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Sunday. And then they run on Sunday morning as well for churchgoers. Typical horsecar looking up Wyoming Avenue from Lackawanna Avenue. Poor team. Here's the building again, the Dixon Locomotive Works. But I put that in because they introduced electric lights in 1880. And a reverend in town, David Spencer, who was a Baptist pastor, he named Scranton for the electric lighting in that building. The first electric lighting in the city. He called that city the Electric City. And yeah, that's part of the office. And yes, there is a paper company in there. Now, Scranton, and if you look at the newspapers, you'll find that Scranton's trolleys ran in 1886 and Richmond's began in 1887. You can't doubt the newspapers because I saw it in print. They built the first successful electric streetcar. And they used strict lines of modern engineering. Yes, there had been other lines and they were pretty much failed. And Scranton laid this without any horsecar tracks. They didn't use existing horsecar tracks. Here is a drawing of it on Spruce Street at Wyoming, December 1886. That was part of an article. And here's the guy that's responsible, a man named Edward Baker Sturgis. And he's a Connecticut person. That's kind of interesting considering Pennsylvania's early history. And he shows up as part of a New York regiment in the state to fight at the Battle of Gettysburg. And then comes back in 1867 for a funeral. And he decides to stay here. He becomes a lawyer. He gets admission to the bar. And he fights for years to curtail all of Scranton's illegal activity because its red light district was known all over eastern Pennsylvania. And he was quite successful, and he dies at the age of 74, and he lives in Greenridge. His father-in-law is George Sanderson, who was involved in the early horse cars. So he has to go downtown every day, and it takes him between 1 hour and 1.5 hours each way, to go between his house and downtown, depending on the weather. So he gets the idea that electricity would provide a better service. And he charters the Scranton Suburban Railway in May of 1886. The Select Council, I think, argues a little bit about the kind of motive power and maybe the kind of rails. And then they say, yeah, you can build up to the Greenridge neighborhood. And here's the guy he gets to build it, Charles Vanderpool. Who's done some other work on some of the unsuccessful lines. And he's very excited to come to Scranton because now he's going to oversee the construction of this new line and he can install his most modern machinery. And he personally lives here in Scranton and supervises the work to install the electric railway. Here's the line. And if you go up from the bottom, we're looking north. From downtown at the turntable, that is Franklin at Lackawanna Avenue. That's the site of the then D&H station. And it's going to go over Spruce Street. So it passes City Hall on Spruce and Adams, and it'll head up on really part of the original line. I mean, a lot of it never changed. It's going to go originally to Delaware Street, and eventually it will go farther up. So, you know, it's very substantial. They use 45 pound T-rail, which anybody working on track today is probably going to laugh. But that was a big deal. They had 150 men under James Kennedy, and he was the guy that really supervised the construction. It was 2.25 miles long, and it was finished just before the trials were announced. It didn't have very much level track. Scranton is a very hilly town. Some of the grades were about 6%. Now the cars show up from Pullman just a day before the trials are supposed to begin, November 28th, 1886. And there are spurs out on Lackawanna Avenue, and they drag the cars off, and they drag them across Lackawanna Avenue to get them on the tracks at Franklin. They're covered, of course, with canvas. And that's one of them. That's an oft seen shot. So I'm not showing you anything new, but you get a good idea of what it was like. Only 16 feet long. They cost $1,800. Maroon on the sides and very pale drab on the ends, whatever that means. But that's how it was described. The car weighed 9,000 pounds, and that included a 2,000-pound motor on the cars. There's the interior looking from front to back. On the front, you're going to see a motor. Back is where you get on the car or off. Mahogany paneling, and had oil lamp reflector in the center, oil lamps with mirrors on the end, and in addition to the end lights, there were 6 Edison incandescent lights. So, you know, huge panes of regular glass here, and you know, it could accommodate 13 passengers on each side. So total passenger count is 26. No heat on the car. And that's pretty much what the primitive motor system looked like. The Vanderpool motor was mounted on the front. Sprague is going to change that. Sprague, when his Richmond system goes in 1887, is going to mount the motors beneath the cars on the axles. And that really is a major improvement over the primitive Vanderpool. So, you know, Sprague does have a hand in forwarding electric traction. It's just that Richmond was not the first. The board of directors, from what I understand from family documents, the board of directors are the ones who push the use of a traveler troller. Anyway, that's the little wagon mounted on the 2 wires above the car, and it's dragged along. If it doesn't fall off, then it powers the car. And if it does fall off, well, you get holes in the roof. One car apparently has 31 holes knocked in its roof in the first 3 months. And of course, if it falls on the ground, it could hurt somebody as well. Then you have to get a pole, which is in the car, and you have to lift it out of the mud. You have to clean it up, and then you have to take that pole and put it back up on the wire. So it was a very laborious job. Now, the family records indicate that 2 people, Kennedy and another employee, Charles Lowey, devised, and I'm sure this was very primitive, pivoted beam arrangement with a wheel on the underside. So a better way to keep that on the wire, but again, not as successful as this sprung pole that Sprague would devise. So again, Sprague is instrumental in improving on the technology of the first system. Here's the first trial trip, and you have that happening at 2:30 in the afternoon, Monday, November 29th. And it's a nasty day. There's a couple of inches of ice and snow, which was typical of the weather in Scranton at that time. And there had also been, rails had been laid in a trench because the city was getting ready to lower Spruce Street. So you've got that filling in the trench. And car 4 accommodates 40 to 50 people and newspaper reporters. Remember, that only seats 26. Vanderpool's running the car, and it takes 5 minutes to go over the downtown portion of the route. And it's horrible conditions. And the car, of course, is totally overloaded, and it makes it with no difficulty. Takes only 4.5 minutes to go about 8 blocks. Now, the second test here is up. There's the motor on the front of the car. And so now Vanderpool's quite elated, and he says, let's turn on the power, put the full current on, and when there's 60 horsepower coming from the generator that feeds the 15 horsepower motors, and there's flashes according to the reports, because the brushes are on the rails in front of the car, and it rounds the bend from Spruce on to Adams. So he's past City Hall, and all of a sudden there's a short circuit and the car is useless. So they have to get some horses. They drag it back to a stable and they do the repairs. And, in fact, then they repair it on the 29th. And that's the day they find nails in the armature, among other things. They really work hard on getting the ice and snow off, and they make another trial. And it goes all the way out up those 6% grades to Greenridge and back. What a success. And it goes a whopping 12 miles an hour. Revenue service begins the next day. And it's a 5-cent ride for everybody that leaves the Academy of Music. At the Academy of Music, they had heard a lecture by Dr. Stanley. You remember we used to hear jokes about Stanley and Livingston on the Three Stooges. Well, there really was a Dr. Stanley, and he took a safari into Africa and found David Livingston. So those people were the first people to successfully ride a regular trip. And this route would continue until December 18th, 1854. And the only change would be an extension. And, we're looking at some of the extension now. It heads up into Drinker Street. This line will go to Laurel Hill and Chestnut, and eventually up here will be the end of the Greenridge Suburban. 1887, there was a report in the Tribune, local newspaper, that 3 cars were in service. And they would extend that line in 1887 and 1888, like the map showed you. More news. We're going to have another streetcar line, December of 1886 already. Talk of the Nail Crosstown line, which would go east to west up both hills of the valley and through downtown Scranton. And that was a typical early streetcar, and we have very little information. They think it's between 1888 and 90. One of the big issues here is there are no fenders. And there's a lot of complaints. By 1895, people are saying the cars are going too fast. 15 to 25 miles an hour, just like Pittsburgh drivers. There are hills, and people feel they're not sounding the signals as they go through the intersection, and people are hurt as the cars run them over. And there's a little boy that's run over, and that makes a big, to do, because the paper says terrible thing that car fenders cost too much. It's cheaper to do a funeral. So there's a big demand in the paper for fenders. The city passes an ordinance for fenders, and the company grabs 3 different fenders for testing. And here's August 29th, 1895, and Mayor Connell and the city engineer are out at the barn to inspect these 3 fenders, the Linden Street barn. And then there's a local person who also invents a fender that's examined. Now you can see it's a cold day, and you can see the operator has absolutely no protection on the cars. This was stolen from the internet. So that's the best quality I can do. When we talk about the pioneer city, the city of Carbondale. And they are looking at Scranton, and they're really the first city in existence even before the Scranton area. And they decide they're going to have a streetcar line, and they, actually put it in. Now, Scranton is a standard gauge line. This is a Pennsylvania broad gauge line of 5 foot 2.5 inches, and it's running by 1888. What they're going to do, Carbondale is here, and north of here, you see Vandling. Well, there's Forest City. And south, they're going to head down through Mayfield, and right about just above Blakely is this town of Peckville. They're planning to charter 3 companies to build from Carbondale north to Forest City and down south to Peckville. And in Peckville, they'll connect with, at that point, Scranton Traction Company. And about an 18-mile long ride, some private right of way, a lot of track in dirt streets off to the side of the street, but they do make a junction with Scranton Traction about 1894 or so. You would think that this city didn't have very many street railways. It actually winds up having 35, although many of them are paper companies. And, you can see the up above, we talked about those systems there, Scranton, Providence, People's Street Railway combining. So that becomes then until 1886, the only railway company. Here's Scranton Suburban, and we know about that. Here's the Naog Crosstown Line, which is chartered in 1886, and they merge and they operate together. Well, there's all this stuff as we try to go out of town. I'll let you read it if you want to when it comes up. But Valley Passenger Railway is over on the east part of Scranton. There's Carbondale, Pittston. We're heading down now into the Wyoming Valley. We have the Scranton Traction Company. All this is happening in late 1880s, early 1890s. They're not all going to build. Scranton and Abington, another railway went and built to the Abingtons. But they're going to become part of Scranton Traction Company. That's incorporated in October 20th, 1892. A bunch of Philadelphia capitalists, essentially investors in a holding company. And there's an act, of course, March 22nd, 1887, which allows them to do that. There's actually going to be several state street railway acts, which give the street railway companies more and more power. And so all these systems on the left are leased to the Scranton, to the Traction Company. But the People's Railway of Luzerne County becomes the owner. So it gets complicated. And the early cars look like this. So the motorman has no protection whatsoever. We're looking on Lackawanna Avenue North on Wyoming before it became double track. So this is the kind of rolling stock that shows up in the 1890s. The first double truck cars won't show up until 1897. So here's another typical car. And it says Scranton Traction, so that's exciting. But we know little about when these cars came because, as I said, the records were destroyed in a fire. Down in Bellevue, South Washington Avenue. And these cars were running, of course, after the first double truck cars showed up. But when we talk about that, you'll see that they get a lot. There's the city growing. 1860, only 9,223. All the industries are going, people are showing up. And by the 1870s, you have 35,000, 1890, 75,000 and some. Now the immigration is coming from Italy, it's coming from Greece, it's coming from Eastern Europe, different people. They think in 1894, the estimate was 103,000 people, and we're looking east up Lackawanna Avenue. This is Franklin. This is where the first electric streetcars started from, right in the middle of that intersection right here. Typical Scranton. So it's a Laurel Hill car. And we're coming, this guy is either coming in or out on Quincy Avenue. Here's private right-of-way right here. And again, your typical neighborhood. Look at that pile of and it's going to get bigger. These breakers would produce until they burned down or the mine near them was gone. Then they'd build another breaker and tear these things down. Now, you look at the population, 1910, 129,000, almost 130,000 people. The entire valley with all the towns that went up and down north and south of Scranton, 314,000 and some. Coal production would peak about 1919 or 1920. And at that point, there were 150,000 people in the city and 380,000 or so in the valley towns. So is pretty unbelievable, all crowded, and you can see how the hills are going up. That's looking west. The east hills look the same. Now, there's a lot of writing on this. And but this is the growth of the system in between 1895 and about 1900. So here's the line coming out of Providence. It's going to go to Carbondale and Forest City by a merger with Carbondale Traction. They're going to build lines up here. It's not showing, but North Main Far comes in, and they're making extensions to Lafayette Street, Sweatland, Lafayette, Washburn, Luzerne. They're going south. That line will eventually go to Duryea, and a connection with Wilkes-Barre. Up in this hill area is the Nativity line. It used to be called Shanty Hill, and there was a minister up there that didn't quite like the reputation and the name, so they changed it. But this line will head south to Pittston, also in the Wyoming Valley, Luzerne County. And your Green Ridge is finally extended up here. This line is in Dunmore, and it's going to go farther up. It's going to go to Throop and Oliphant. So that's going to build. Just wanted to show you this is cool because I got that in the internet and on eBay, and they change the People Street Railway to Scranton Railway Company, and that's chartered December 18th, 1896. It consolidates all the traction company through lease or purchase. And believe it or not, there are 38 separate properties that are involved in this acquisition. Here we are at what's known as Dunmore Corners, and car on Blakely Street over to my right, and he's heading inbound, and we're in Dunmore, PA, and here comes a car outbound. But we don't know. He could be a Laurel Hill car crossing over in front of 19. I bought a couple of negatives on eBay, and I guess nobody wanted them because they were all of the Hotel Casey. But the one, this guy here, is a little four-wheel nativity car down in the lower left. That's why I bought these negatives. It's 220. It's clear, a clear picture. And you take a look at the fender on the car. This is a novel use of the fenders. You'll see them on a lot of cars. And that is they put advertising placards. And this was a glass plate, so it was clear. And it advertises the musical, The Merry Widow. Here's the Hotel Casey that's put up in 1910, opened in 1911. For years and years, it is the classic place to stay. They'll eventually knock it down, but they'll put in another hotel here. Look up Wyoming Avenue from Spruce Street, and Linden Street is up where the cathedral is. They're putting double track here, double tracking Wyoming Avenue all the way up to Linden Street, and that'll help the Northern Electric, as we'll see later on. They had to put new switches here as well. And here we are looking at outbound cars. They're going north on North Washington Avenue. That big building over here to the right of the large monument is the Lackawanna County Courthouse. The Board of Trade is the other building with the huge steeples. But take a look between the streetcars here at the picture of Columbus. Now, I think I mentioned the red light district, and it was infamous. The Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad ran special trains from New York City area, so people can have a fine time, maybe without their wives, who knows, in the red light district. And there was prostitution, and there was a lot of drinking, and there was a lot of gambling. People would get off the railroad station and wonder where in the heck their destination was. So if you look at this car, the station is 2 blocks up to my right. And if they wandered down this far and asked a passerby, all the passerby said was, follow the finger of Columbus. This is the statue of Columbus. And that will get you to the infamous red light district. There was a bike race apparently at some year. It's unknown. But that was a typical streetcar of the period. And along Lackawanna Avenue, another shot on Lackawanna Avenue, and another little four-wheel car, and it's the 1890s. Unbelievable number of buildings that are no longer there. Beautiful architecture in the city. Here's the original post office, and right to the right of that, you'll see a part of the Linden Street barn. It's a great shot here of another four-wheeler. this is the fancy Wyoming Avenue at Spruce Street. And look, I mean, these buildings, of course, are no longer there. An unbelievable architecture. It is before 1900. Notice the double track is now in place that we just talked about. Typical open car. He's on Drinker Street, and he's heading out towards Laurel Hill on Chestnut Street. And that's a great shot of an open car. Another open car, and North Washington Avenue looking east. And most of the buildings on this hill, you can't see them today. It's all trees. They've knocked it all down. Looking towards what is the hill section, that is a car on Prescott Avenue. You can take a look at, that's a typical heavy grade on a streetcar line. There's more of the four-wheel cars. So that's Mulberry Street. That was a very steep hill. I got this out of a book, out of Brill magazine, and it came out pretty well. But there was an article in a newspaper at that time, August of 1899. They were criticizing the poor track. They called the streetcar equipment secondhand, although it really wasn't. They said there wasn't enough rolling stock, and we've all heard that before in that period. But they wrote that it was the poorest service in any large city, but there was going to be an improvement. So, and there's that advertising placard where everybody can see it. The American Railways Company, that's a Philadelphia-based holding company, they get a hold of the Scranton Railway Company now in 1905. They're going to hold on to that system until 1925. Here's a car built about 1910. There's Stevenson, Cincinnati, Brill. I know those were three builders. Southern was another builder of some of the Scranton cars. And there's the map. And you know, I've got a arrow to show you we're going from south to north, left to right. And just to give you an idea of the extent of the system. What's not on here is the line out in the mountains and the Poconos to Moosic Lake. But you can see the line here to Throop, the Carbondale Providence line going through all these different valley towns. Here we are heading down to Duryea, where we connect with Wilkesboro, and the line going through Southside and on out to Pittston. It's quite a place. 1905, 85 miles of track, 300,000 riders, 600 people are employed. They spend on their payroll over $1 million. And they built $507,800 worth of new track. It was all north-south. It was really impossible to get out of the valley. And so really, except for the line to Moosic Lake, nothing is going to get out of the valley. Now, west of the Lackawanna River, and Lackawanna Avenue becomes West Lackawanna Avenue. And it crosses the DL&W Railroad at grade. And neither the railway system or the city or the railroad really likes this. But initially, the railroad had wanted a 22-foot clearance here, and they all fought it. You know, they for a new bridge, and they eventually would lower it to 17 feet when the air brakes made it unnecessary for a man to run up and down on top of the cars pulling the brakes. That's a death trap, is what they call this here, and of course, a huge source of delays. You can see it again. That's the Hyde Park section. Take a look at that hill. And about a third of the population at this point, around 1900, is living up in that Hyde Park section. Well, we're going to begin work. Everybody comes up with agreement. The railroad and the traction company are going to pay $60,000 to build the viaduct. All those buildings that you saw on both sides of the city is going to deal with for paying damages, because obviously the owners are going to be kicked out. And here is the, shoveling the first dirt. And I got this in because this is Scranton Railway's dispatcher, Giles Schenck. And he is doing the shoveling on April 28th, 1903. Eventually, Scranton Railway will contribute $90,000 to this project. It's quite an investment. And they start the building. These buildings are all going to have to come down. And there's a streetcar rumbling through here. There's another one up on 9th Street at Lackawanna Avenue. The early phases, another early phase. But it gives you a good view of an open car. This temporary trestle will be built, although it won't be open right away. Here we are in August of 1903. The trolleys are going to come underneath until they have enough built here to, get the trestle connected to something. And we're looking on Lackawanna Avenue towards the city east at 9th Street. Just gives you a good idea of the construction, a nice view of a car. Only about 40 passenger car, 40 to 43 feet were what these double truckers generally were in the earlier days. But the bridge comes along. It's all done by hand for the most part. Another good shot of cars, an open and a closed car heading west. These were from glass plate negatives that the Lackawanna Historical Society acquired. And they're finally putting it together. And it opens finally to all traffic on November 16th, 1903, 5 o'clock. And so think about it. They only took a few months to do all this work. Trolley freight will run. Begins on April 29th of about 1907. I'll have to put that in here, but I know it's 1907 because they very quickly took advantage of the state law that allowed streetcar companies to carry freight. And they leased their operation. They bought cars and leased it to the Blue Line Express and quick delivery service. Not speedy, quick. The railroads provided cars and the crew. Afterwards, this one, at least for a while, became a sweeper. I'm sure they kept it out on the Carbondale line or Pittston, someplace where that long long extension didn't interfere with automobile and other traffic. Here are some other cars that became sheds in the Carbon Street yard, located near the car barn. The big roof in the background is part of the Scranton Transit car barn. Service ended by 1925. I don't see a newspaper article that says that, but you don't see very much in it after 1925. And these were still here in the 80s. And Dummy here never took a picture of it. I wasn't quite sure what they were, I guess. But that is Providence Road in the background. Here's the interurban map, I call it. You get to see it a little bit more. Here's the Carbondale Railway, organized in 1867 up here. The traction company formed in 1892 and merged all the subsidiaries in 1896. They're going to standard gauge that track. Scranton Railway, Scranton Traction is going to get a hold of it. And from this area, Peckville, all the way up, they will broad gauge, or they'll take the broad gauge out, and put in standard gauge. And the cars will keep moving up farther north as the track is extended until you get to Forest City. There was a line up here through Throop and Oliphant. They had to fight the railroad several times because track was all over the valley, getting into just about every coal mine that you can find. Plenty of industries, of course. And when they get to Oliphant, well, they're not going to be able to cross the Delaware and Hudson. It's 4 tracks. And they can't get into downtown because the railroad says no, and the court agrees with them. It's too dangerous. We're going to go down through mining towns, Taylor, Old Forge, and then finally Duryea, where people get off and walk about 100 feet, get on a Wilkes-Barre Railway car. That's about 1900. We'll talk about the Pittston line all the way down here. And that can be that's a disaster sometimes, but there are different fare zones. Carbondale's the longest line, 23 and about 3/4 or so miles long. In fact, that's a 2.5 hour ride, and 6 fare zones, and it ran every 30 minutes on the hour and the half hour. And of course, here's that Carbondale line. We saw that map before. Scranton Railway is going to run out of downtown and wander through all these towns, Blakely and Peckville and Priceburg, which is Dixon City, Mayfield. It was a huge railroad yard here. Here's a shot I found on the internet from Dixon City, and it shows you typically the four-wheel cars that originally were on that line. Must have been a lot of bouncing on that line, but you can see track in the center, every so often a passing siding. Not very much traffic in the early days. This was a wonderful find on the internet. Thank everybody for not buying it. This is what's called Blakely Corners. And these buildings are all still here except for the gas station. That's the CVS. So this is what the line looks like. And I found that building over there on the right. So I've been able to identify that. Now, all these valley towns, one after another, and all surrounding coal mines. Archbald, nothing is here in Archbald, but the Lackawanna Historical Society director grew up there and knew exactly what's there. She said it's Barrett's Pub. Now, I stole this or got it from a wonderful video put out by a Walter Kieslowski of the New York, Ontario, and Western Railroad Society. This is the railroad crossing, the 4-track crossing the Scranton Railway had to contend with up in Mayfield. That's just north of the huge railroad yard where all the coal going north on the O&W was marshaled. Then you're going to get through Carbondale, and I've never seen a good picture, but this is Carbondale's main street. And of course, the single track ran through there. I did find this postcard, and it's not a real one, but it gives you an idea what it was. This little accident is in Carbondale, and I know very little about it, but it does give you a good view of the type of equipment, double truck equipment that was used. And finally, you get to Forest City. And I've been up here looking, and these buildings, most of them have been changed or knocked down. There was coal mining as far north as Forest City, which was just north of Lackawanna County. The line to Throop was the Oliphant and Whitten, which, was chartered in 1893, leased. So many lines in Pennsylvania are leased by Lackawanna Valley, and it's only a 6.5 mile line out of from Dunmore, and it goes through Throop. And they're fighting a railroad over the course of almost a year because the railroad has a spur to a mine. They don't want to cross it. But that's the equipment used on it. And this is typical of what that right-of-way was. And we're between, I believe, Dunmore and Throop. And if you go here today, it's hotels, Wendy's, McDonald's, stores, Penn State University. It doesn't look like this at all. 30-cent ride to Oliphant, but then you got to walk across the railroad to get to downtown. And that ruling occurred in 1896. If you went south to Taylor, all I can say is that is South Main Avenue, and today it's Walmart and a whole bunch of other stuff. A different bridge over the railroad, but a bridge still there. We're going to head down to the mining towns of Taylor and Old Forge, and they both look alike. Old Forge, of course, is been named by its citizens as the pizza capital of the world because there are a lot of pizza shops, and in general, the pizza is very good. And when you leave Old Forge, you cross the Lackawanna River along with the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western. Note the coal breaker over on the right. And they built their own trestle in here. There's a good side view of it from a book published by Scranton Railway about 1901. And I don't have a shot of the end of the line. Although somewhere I have a Wilkesboro picture, which shows the beginning of that one. But you had to get off the car and walk. And a couple of the buildings are still there, so it's still evident. Now, they wanted to get down to Pittston, and they chartered the Scranton and Pittston traction in 1893. And of course, there's 3 different properties here composing that. Just like the Laura line had a number of properties all buying upland and starting to build. And then they gave a lease in 1896 in the fall to Scranton Railway Company. And then they finally merged this mess in November of 1911. Now, down through here, as it came down, it was pretty rural down through here. You'll have a couple of bridges to go over because the D&H and the Lehigh Valley will refuse passage. All right, let me see if I can get this area. Couldn't get it to move. That's one of the bridges they built down in what is now called DuPont, PA. And there were a lot of problems. They had to argue with numerous councils as well as the railroad. This bridge was 1,200 feet long. And they had to build an underpass under the Delaware and Hudson near Spring Street in the borough of Moosic. Now, yes, this is the Laurel Line. And I'll tell you that there's a little bit of that platform still there today. But take a look at the extreme right of the platform and you will see the incline getting up to the trestle in DuPont. And that's typical right away. And that abutment for the Laurel Line is still there today. That's Route 11. About 1903. And from the Scranton Railway book that they published of the area, here's a typical right-of-way shot. Why the track is up on the left and the people are down on the right, I don't know. It wasn't very good thinking, I guess. There's another shot again. Look at the car line. I hope the car line does go through those communities because otherwise there's no business. No, this isn't Kansas, and no, that lady is not going to turn into a witch and ride her bike in the sky. Finally, you get to Pittston, the main street in Pittston and Wilkes-Barre. This is a pretty good downtown. The biggest city between Scranton and Wilkes-Barre Railways is down here as well with 3 lines going through or to Pittston. And they, couldn't cross the 4-track main line in Moosic no matter what they did. So you had to have the people get off one car and onto another. The Laurel Line was there carrying people between Scranton and Wilkes-Barre and the intermediate towns, and most people took a faster train. This line was a pretty much local carrier. Never profitable. It was abandoned early in pieces. March of 1924, they get rid of 6 of the miles from Pittston to the border between Moosic Borough and Lackawanna Township, which is now a part of the city of Scranton. And that's at Corey Avenue. That now terminates at Corey Avenue, and it will continue to do that until the 30s. There's no bus running there, and the last car leaves on April 15th, 1924, and it's the first Scranton Railway line to be abandoned. Now, everybody has a place to go and play, and in Scranton, it became Moosic Lakes, as well as Rocky Glen Park. But Moosic Lakes, 2 different lakes, was out in the Poconos, pretty high, 2,323 feet or so. It's in Lackawanna County. And these lakes were originally known as Cobbs and Mud Ponds. How nice. The Burke brothers purchased about 5,000 acres up there, including the lakes, and they created a resort. And they built on a ledge, on a shelf out through the mountains, a narrow gauge railroad, which ran every so often, as the papers say. Never really ran on a schedule. It opened up on June 8th, 1902. And like I said, it had a 2% grade. It was on a shelf. It was 9 miles long. But people loved to come up here. The Burkes improved it, bathhouse, arcade, docks, and it was a 30-cent ride to get up there. So it was cheap. And you could avoid Scranton's blue laws by coming out here. And sometimes I believe baseball was played here. That's robbed out of a book, but that's typical secondhand D&W locomotive. It's a Camelback with the cab in the middle, straddling the boilers. That was not uncommon up there. The service was sporadic, beginning in 1903 in the spring. And originally, they ran flat cars with sides and benches. And that was impractical. Of course, then they converted to standard gauge and believe they bought these locomotives and a couple of old passenger cars, and it was still not profitable. They just couldn't get up the grades with enough cars to make it worthwhile. So, it was kind of a success in a way, but they could not get enough people. Here's the schedule. And then they decide, look, Scranton's got trolleys. Why don't we get the trolleys out here? And they work with Scranton Railway. All the single track in Dunmore and in the city going up that way was double tracked. And that way, all the regular cars and the Music Lake cars would be able to run together. Then they signed the agreement in November of 1909, and they come up with all this extra capital. Now it's $250,000 instead of the 100,000, and that money is used for the poles and the track and the overhead wire. They built some trestles up in there, curve reductions, grade reductions. They completed in 1910. The first car runs up to the lake May 15th, 1911. Here's the line. When you come out of downtown, and we're heading up what we've seen before, Quincy and Madison and Blakely, the Laurel Hill line. Then you get up into Dunmore. Laurel Hill is heading over here. These are narrow streets. I've driven them. And you come out here to private right of way, and everybody's built factories and the interstates through there. So I can no longer track the right of way through here. This is Interstate 380. Although you want to walk up here and get a tick bite, it's up there. And I have seen it in the early 80s. They obviously needed substations, and they bought these two substations. This is shown on the Wilkesboro system. Wilkesboro picked them up afterwards, probably for Harvey's Lake, their interurban line to a park. But they did park them up there. One was right where you went on the private right-of-way off the Dunmore streets. The other was on a siding between Dunmore and the end of the line at the lake. This was the first car on May 15th, and it was not a real passenger car. Operators came out, they were breaking people in, so it was really considered test runs. But if you wanted to ride, they weren't about to stop you. One of the 10-600 cars from St. Louis that were built in 1901 and were the last open cars to go into Scranton. They had opens originally running out there, and finally replaced them with cars from Cincinnati and with some deck roof cars from an earlier series like this. So they built these. They were pay-as-you-enter cars. They were the first arch roof and the first pay-as-you-enter cars in Scranton. And they had an off season life in the Throop Oliphant line, and that's in the yard at Providence Road in 1935 or so. And then they bought these in 1912. They came from Southern, and they were kind of a unique design, turtle roof, also pay as you enter. And in the off season, they ran them pretty much everywhere except the Green Ridge Peoples line and my Bellevue line, because they were low bridges and you just couldn't get these higher cars underneath. And the Laurel Line station is right behind the photographer, and that big building is the erecting shops for steam locomotives for the DL&W Railroad. It now produces ammunition for the government. These guys came along, and they were MU originally in 1914. They were built for the Music Lake service also. So Westinghouse couplers and the receptacles and, all the things that a city car wouldn't have. An air whistle was located, and they were also used on many city lines, except for some reason, not only Bellevue and Greenridge Peoples, but Southside and Nativity. And I suspect it's because they were too long to get around some of the curves up in the South Side. They built these, the last Music Lake cars, the 378 to 87. This is the only picture I've ever seen of them because they were scrapped in the 1930s. They were heavy cars. They had MCB 27 trucks, and they were really high speed. They could do 50 or 60. Again, MU. And they were used, believe it or not, in most of the West Side. But so they could fit under the bridge on the Bellevue line. And I suspect when Music Lake was closed, these were popular on the Carbondale line until you got out of Carbondale and cut the line back to Blakely. We'll see that in the 30s. They were all scrapped by the 30s. Here's a typical ad in the paper. And I thought that was kind of neat. And they say frequent car service. And they had this jingle, and of course they incorporated Phoebe Snow, who was a popular mascot of the Dale and W Railroad. Just leave the train. Yeah. So obviously the railroad didn't write this. Postcard will show you today. This is Interstate 380. And the railroad you're seeing are the L&W over here in the center. And over on the right is the Erie. And up in this hillside is what they called Gateway to the Clouds. That was the Scranton, Dunmore, and Moosic Lake Railroad, which was the trolley line. And you can see the trolley line right up on top. Nice flat area above the smoke that's coming out of the pushers. It's a short coal train. It was a steep grade coming out. That's Roaring Brook. And there, the reason that thing's up on the right, this was a local Horgan card. He was a local photographer, and he put together a card with 4 different scenes of Moosic Lake, including one with the trolley. And it really gives you an idea of what the line was like up there. They called this the Palisades, and that was a place to see. So if you like rock formations, you went by this on the Scranton, Dunmore, and Moosic Lake. And this is what it looks like today. And I know that this is a recent set of photos that I got off the internet, but in the early 80s, this is what it looked like for me. I crawled up a hill. I parked on Route 435. There was no interstate there, so I felt safe doing that and walked up, and it was pretty unbelievable. The line will quit by March of 1926, and that's because the park and the railway couldn't come to terms with what the fare should be, so the streetcar company could earn a profit. And they just walked away from it. And when I was up there were still some line poles and occasionally span wires, and this is what it looks like. And really, it's very eerie up there today. First 10 double truck cars showed up in 1897. 1900, they're carrying 10.5 million riders. Barney and Smith, that's the other company I couldn't remember, another car builder. And eventually they're going to get 43 of these double truck type cars. They stayed around in some cases till 1942. These are Stevenson cars, and they're roughly 40 feet in length. Some were 43. And until the cars from Cincinnati came, this is what people rode. Here's a shot, another shot, different area though, looking down Lackawanna Avenue. There's the hills to the east, so part of that valley. The hub is right here at Penn and Lackawanna Avenue, and then there was a dispatcher in one of these buildings, office buildings. He could see everything, literally everything going by, all 30 routes. There were 80 base and 94 peak hour cars that passed this location at Franklin Avenue. And of course, this is where the original Scranton Railway cars left in 1886. So a couple of scenes that we don't have to dwell on too much. But these are nice picture and postcard shots. 1912, 100 cars. It's quite a fleet. 23 routes. And this was the wholesale block. And we're looking east, and you had to come off the Lackawanna Avenue Bridge and fight your way through here. I'm sure the sounds and the smells were unbelievable. I'm sure the delays were quite heavy. But the wholesale block in the 70s was still there, not doing nearly as much business. Certainly no horses. And the same area, although this guy looks like he has a clearer shot, and he's rumbling down Lackawanna Avenue. And just to the left of the picture is this railroad crossing. That's the same building. There's still a crossing here today, and it's used by the Delaware Lackawanna 2-3 times a week for regular trains going to Carbondale. That big building on the right is the huge Delaware and Hudson Railroad Station. So busy place downtown, lots of business. Samter's, oh God, Samter's is where I got all my Boy Scout stuff in the 60s. And they were still there in the 70s when they moved out to Viewmont Mall. Linden Street and on Wyoming. And if you look behind the front car, Scranton Railway car, that's a car on the Northern Electric. That's the other line that came through the mountains, the only line that cut through the mountains to go up to the Clark Summit area and beyond, Factoryville, Huncannock. There's the Northern Electric train. Scranton Railway had 2 double tracks. They basically, on the outbound, used just the one on the right. That was the car going to Greenridge Peoples, named for the Peoples Street Railway. So Northern Electric had an office. Actually, there would be several ticket offices over on the left, and they had permission to lay their cars over, load in, unload here. There's the Hotel German that replaced the Forest Place. And, 1911, I got this statistic from the railways, 4 million and some miles is what the streetcars did. So they can circle the globe 162 times. And we're looking at the German, typical 4-wheel or 8-wheel car. They opened that in 1896. It's still there. The Purple Cow restaurant is in. It's 85 apartment units in this building, Lackawanna Avenue. When I put this in, I didn't realize that lamp would get in the way, but so I hope you don't mind. And the safety islands that were put in about 1930. 2 department stores here on the corner, the Globe store and the Scranton Dry Goods, or Oppenheim's as it's sometimes called as well. And the building over on the left is what's known as the coal exchange. So a lot of coal companies had offices in there. Another typical double trucker. There's the advertising that they just placed right on the fender. 81.55 miles of track in 1910. Here's the last of the open cars that were built, 601 to 610. He's laying over on Arthur Avenue along Naog Park. And yeah, they advertised Luna too. But what you had to do when you came up Mulberry Street is you had to get off and you had to walk about a half a mile down into Luna Park. For a couple of years, the Laurel Line served Luna Park, but and the Luna Park itself wasn't there. It stayed for a couple of years and was burned. Amazingly, all the Luna Parks seemed to burn. Now, American Railways didn't really build any more mileage, but there are 2 big improvements. And here's the first. We're looking up that Lackawanna Avenue hill, and the car is not going up the hill now. It's making a turn left, and it's going to go over 2 blocks and go up the much gentler grade on Linden Street. So a little bit more in terms of mileage, but it's a whole lot safer and a whole lot easier, particularly in bad weather. Then they have this being built. It was never a bridge when you came off Mulberry Street, and you had to go a circuitous way north on Capouse Avenue and over on Carbon Street, and you had to cross a lot of railroads. So here's this Enid Miller shot, and this is 1946. But just like the Smithfield Street Bridge, they're going to build this. Here's a map. Penn Avenue. Capouse is farther down. You're coming out of the city, and Mulberry Street's over here, and you've got to go all the way down around the Dixon Locomotive Works and over Carbon Street. 4 tracks on the D&H Railroad, and the other side is the New York, Ontario, and Western. It's busy, and so it's dangerous, and there's quite a few delays. So they get a bond issue. 1911, there's a bond issue that's put out after a lot of talk, and they will build the bridge you saw with 2 streetcar tracks on one side and 2 vehicular lanes. The railroad's going to pay $25,000. The street railway is going to invest $90,000 in this. Construction begins in June 1911. Here, taken from newspapers.com, is the very first car that's coming across the bridge. And of course, 358, loaded with dignitaries. The motorman's Michael Lynch. He's what's known as the chief motorman. This is just before noon. And after the trip was made, the maiden trip, then Superintendent Riley said all the cars should start using the bridge. And so the Northern Electric cars also began using the bridge. This overall view shows you a couple things. If you can see my mouse, here's the bridge. When you come down the bottom, you have the Scranton Railway car barn. You have the Carbon Street yard here. And over here is a big open yard where they were supposed to put a car house, and they never did. But instead of going across, what you had to do was, clunk your way down block after block behind the breaker, and then under the railroad, under the Erie, and over the D&H here, over the river, and over the O&W. So it took time, and yes, it was dangerous. Now here's the line car. For people that like this thing, the line car is doing its work, and it's put the red flag out, and woe to the operator that denies himself the flag. Carbondale had a car barn up in Mayfield near the O&W Railroad, and this was their barn, and it was used for a little while. Wasn't very big. That's the powerhouse next to the barn, and that was built in 1887. And when they finally built the other addition to the Providence Road barn, they just used it for storage for a couple of years, closed it about 1908. Here's more of the Linden Street barn, the big fire, May 2nd, 1891. And it made a lot of news. It was a, half hour, in a half hour, they consumed 29 streetcars. And, 2 were on the tracks between the sidewalk and the building. So, there was a lot of damage, as you can see, about $60,000. Although some people think that's a low estimate. They think an employee's oil lamp went off when he was refilling it. But anyway, it also damaged some buildings surrounding it in the back. St. Luke's Church on Wyoming Avenue was also damaged. Here's the new building. Then we're looking down Washington Avenue, south, and the post office we've seen before. Here's a good shot of that building. There had been a stable there from 1878. And then they built this new building in 1892. There's a map that shows this 3 tracks going in. Eventually, this building will be used by Northern Electric and Scranton Railway freight cars till about 1925. Okay, 1892. It's open. It's big, 68 feet wide, 220 feet deep, quite architectural. And inside, it's pretty interesting because it's all trestling. So people can get in there, mechanics, and do all their minor work. I'm sure that was pretty awful crawling through there. There's a real shop area in the back. Then they're going to build this, the Mulberry Street, even before the Mulberry Street, they're going to build this on Providence Road at that Carbon Street. Both the car barn and the powerhouse behind it, and this building over here would be erected in 1901. So you have this brick barn, only 114 feet long, and it's built for single truck cars, so short cars. And you can put 60 cars, dirt floor. There was a transfer table in the back of that. And, here we are building the 1901 barn because it's not big enough as the double truckers are coming. There are, the powerhouse will be used for a while. There's a siding from the O&W behind here. And they're getting coal from not the O&W, but a mine that's up along North Main Avenue. And so this little guy runs a couple of trips a day, and he gets coal at Bull's Head. I don't know the name of the mine, but the Bull's Head is a section of Providence. And so they're going to take this and bring the coal down to the powerhouse. Here's the 1901 barn. More cars, longer cars. We need facilities. And this is going to become the main barn. And they'll close the barn up in Mayfield, and they will use the smaller barn as storage. And that's a map from an atlas, a 1918 atlas. So here's the other side of the D&H is down here on the lower side of the, I wish they had the track there, but then you cross this busy O&W line, and there's the Carbon Street yard here. There's Providence Road up here, the big open storage yard. Here's the barns. If you go farther up, we'll see something else in a minute. This is a view of Carbon Street. 3 or 4 tracks, not that big, but there's a connection with the O&W here. That building is part of a freight car as well. Here's their general work motor that survived till about 1944. And I've never been able to speak to anybody that knew what this thing did. I think it lifted cars. And since there was a track connection with the O&W, they might have brought flat cars in and then tried to get them off here. Or they could have just lifted cars and got them off their trucks. Don't really know. It's a mystery. Jim Schuman took this picture from Mifflin Avenue, standing between the Linden Street and the Mulberry Street Bridge. That's Mulberry over there. And that shows you as they needed more space. They were going to build a car barn here. They never did. So they put this big open area in. And it's interesting that every picture I've ever seen of this this yard shows that they've parked the similar cars on the same tracks. So that's the Linden Street Bridge in the background. Big brewery over here on the right. Big heavy concrete brewery. Took a year to take down. And yeah, I'm sorry, it's not clear, but it does show the expanse of the yard. Sweepers, they stored all their sweepers over here in this yard. Today it's an expressway going through here and you can't recognize it at all. There's all of the comb banks, as we call them, CULM, from the Mount Pleasant Breaker 1 and 2, and the row of sweepers. All 7 of them. Not the one from Gary. That'll show up later. There's a nice expanse of showing you the brick. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened here. The dispatcher building over on the right. There's the sand tower that everybody had to stop off on. There's the way up to the track only side of the Mulberry Street Bridge. Now, if you went up a bit north on Providence Road, just a few blocks, that's the track that would go into the railroad track, into the Mount Pleasant Breaker. And right here behind this pile of logs, I had to look at it at first, is work car 1052. So obviously they were able to interchange if they needed to, because it was all standard gauge. And I have no documentation that they ever hauled any freight cars to the barn, but they certainly could transload equipment and supplies from boxcars to the trolley. Now, this was very common. Usually you see houses going in the ground. Ed Miller remembers as a young boy in his house in Pittston, watching a young girl on the other side of the street just fall in as the ground gave in. And in this case, it's blocking the streetcar and the pipes are gone. This is cave-ins. Mine cave-ins were ever too common up there. And even in the 60s, they were happening. And it snowed. And Ed Miller caught a beautiful shot of 3 sweepers, 2 buses, and a 418 from Osgood Bradley down on Lackawanna Avenue around Penn. This was the blizzard to top all blizzards, the Billy Sunday blizzard. Billy Sunday was sort of a self-appointed reverend, and he went around, preaching the gospel. And he did that in Scranton. He had a huge tent that people came to, and they came on the trolley. And this happened while they were there. So they were all really stuck in that tent. This all had to be hand dug. This is out on the through line, March 1st, 1914. Another one there. So that must have been fun to get rid of. And 500 men, according to that article, to clear the track. They got the service, full service, opened in 3 days. So $1,500 for sandwiches and lunches for the part-time workers. And, sandwiches were 5 and 10 cents back then. So there was a lot of sandwiches. 1923, Scranton Railway is owned by another company, the American Electric Power Company. This is a Brill car, 320. It's in Duryea. Nice shot of the step, and nice shot of the ad. Now, buses are going to show up 1924. 1923 is the final year for an all-rail system, and they will establish, probably using something like that up above, a line to Kaiser Valley. And if you look at the car down here on the bottom, it couldn't go any farther than the D&W Railroad. It wasn't allowed to cross. So the bus would be on the other side going farther. That's a Washburn car in 1942 on the last day of service, January 3rd, 1942. Now, they're going to get some new cars, finally. The first one since 1916. This is 1925. Osgood Bradley will provide 400 to 409, and that's really part of a 25-car order. Keystone Public Service is going to also supply these to the system in Altoona and to the system to Youngstown, Ohio. And there was a multitude of colors on the railway at this time. Nothing was really standard. And this was orange and brown, and it had a tan roof. And the bumpers, of course, were aluminum. Lackawanna Avenue. Another one of those, different design, different color. They bought these in 1926, the next year. Also from Osgood Bradley, 410 to 421, for the same three properties. And they would all be scrapped between 1950 and 1953. It's the end of the Greenridge Suburban line. It's the end of the Drinker line. This appears to, it could be the blue and white or the blue and cream that would become more standard by the end of the 30s, beginning of the 40s. This service up here, what was left of the line that used Music Lake, August 12th, 1939. There's the cat's whiskers. They put these on, according to Jim Wirt, to make the car look wider, because motorists were coming along, and as we all know, some of these people are not the best drivers. Now, here's 394. Scranton Railway bought hardly any cars from other systems. They did buy 2 from Millville in New Jersey, and they bought 8 cars from a West Virginia property, the Ohio Valley Electric Railway. I think it was Huntington. And they showed up in 1926 or so, and they were used until 47 or 48, when majority of lines were going to be abandoned. And here's that before blue and white. Here's the standard cream and blue, which I really, really thought was nice. And it's Christmas time. The Globe Store has its trees up. And if you look here, right here and over here, they've got decorations, but they're not going over the wire. Another cat's whiskers car, Washington Avenue, North Washington, passing Central High School. And the ownership is now changed again in 1925. National Public Service Corporation, and that's an Insel property, is going to grab it. And I was told, based on the base color of the car, the whiskers could either be red, brown, or either black or silver. So confusing. Yes, it's a little not sharp, but Lackawanna Avenue, there's the D&H station on the left. And they started in 1926 to convert their cars to one-man operation, and had done a lot of it by 1927. The heaviest line went from South Main and West Side up to Drinker Street to Dunmore. And eventually only the Carbondale line, the Throop Oliphant line, the Old Forge Laurel Hill lines were 2-man. They were interurbish type cars. The last 2-man cars basically early in 1928. Another eBay find. It's a matchbook cover, but nobody bid on this. And isn't it wonderful? Look at this. The full matchbook on top. It's an ad by the railway. And, when you look at the car, 421, this is after 1926, on or after 1926. And there's the first, they're paying here a homage to their first electric car. We don't expect you to use that, though, when you ride with us. 1929, you have 18 rail lines left, 6 bus lines, and they've made bus substitutions on 6 lines. And of course, they've cut back on some of the lines, and some of the lines actually parallel by several blocks the streetcar line. The High Works line is the first line to go into downtown, and it's up in this area here, and it's going to run into downtown. It's going to serve the D&W shops. This is also served by the North Main Forest streetcar, but the bus can probably run right into the shop area. So between 1924 and 42, you're going to see 12 streetcar lines affected, either with total or partial abandonments. 6 of those lines would have bus substitutions, and there were almost 12 bus extensions during that period. Here's an Old Forge car. By now, it's no longer in Duryea. It's in the middle of Old Forge. And I tried to find out just where the heck this was. You know what? All these buildings have been replaced by Wendy's and McDonald's, parking lots and a bank. And all I can do is go by the record that some people told me that they ended up at Railroad Street in Old Forge. They would eventually be cut back to Taylor as well. The Carbondale line was cut back too. They took it from Forest City to Simpson, which is right outside, just north of Carbondale. And a bus went up there, a separate private bus company. And then 5 years later, in 1931, they cut it back to Blakely Corners. And I apologize for using this postcard again, but it's relevant, and I don't have anything else here. Finally, it's going to be cut back to the city line, Dixon City, Scranton City line. Anybody here goes up there today, Viewmont Mall is up on the hill on the right. This is the Interstate 81 coming through. The mine, the Marvin Breaker, is behind the car, right behind the car, although he's set up and ready to go back into the city. Now, the Old Forge line that we saw, it's cut back now to the Scranton-Taylor line. So back to the city boundary. And that's great street, isn't it? Why do you think it's like that? Why do you think it's an up and down roller coaster? Well, that's because coal mine continues to cause subsidence, and you'll find this as homes drop in, as basements crack, basement foundations, and yeah, the street goes up and down. Here's Drinker Street. I found this at the Lackawanna Historical Society. They got rid of the Throop Oliphant line, so now it's back in Dunmore. That line, had that area had started to get buses in about 1924, so very early bus operations in that area. And so Drinker Street was one of the heavier lines, and it ran in August of 1939 for the last time. Now, American Railways. Allegedly, their standard colors were light green with cream, reddish brown sash, and doors. Although Ed Miller would record a whole bunch of colors at the Providence Street Yard. In fact, he indicated they could be green and cream, cream and white, blue and cream, blue and white, blue and yellow, orange and brown, and some red and white ones. So we're on Lackawanna Avenue. Taking a look at 324. 324, remember that number because it's significant. 1928, and I'm looking west at a hillside that no longer exists. All those buildings are trees. It becomes another Insel property, this time Middle West Utilities Company. So there's holding companies all over the place. This is 1940. And these guys come in 1929. Scranton's last streetcars of any type come from Osgood Bradley, from Worcester, Mass, of course, and they're 30 feet long, and they are painted with the cat's whiskers. And here they are on the Dunmore Suburban line. There's the coal exchange, that big building with the tower up there is the coal exchange. We have no idea what that is. Okay. There. Interior shot. We have to have an interior shot. Really, really comfortable, though, inside, obviously. Even the operator now has a comfortable seat. I can only imagine, was this cream and green? Or was it another light color? We don't know. But here it is with the power plant really behind me. And I got this photo on eBay, and of course it had all the information, relevant information, right? And I was driving around all over the city looking for this thing. I up and down the Green Ridge line, and finally got disgusted and got out of my car, go in the back, get a sandwich I had and something to drink. And I look up, and there's the steps and there's the building. So I was able to find it. Larch Street. Flo Ziegfeld. He put this color on 507, cream body with dark blue outlines on the belt rail, all the trim on the letterboard, what cantaloupe roof. You can imagine how easy it was to keep that car clean. There's the post office, built about 1930. There's 1931 tour. Here's another shot. There is the county courthouse, still there today behind us. And it was incorrectly labeled, but I could tell by the Board of Trade building here that we're turning from Adams onto Spruce. Really, the area, the track that really sported the original 1886 cars. And then I was in National Bakery. When I'm there, I stop all the time for their hard rolls. And this guy was there, and I thought, I never saw one of these cars painted that dark. And I went to ask the owner if I could scan it. And we talked a little bit, and it turns out he knew my brother in high school. So sure, you can scan it. And it came up pretty good for me not being able to get it out of the frame and away from the glass. He had it nailed in there. But that's an early 30s shot, and they were painted dark. And then by the 40s, by the early 40s, late 30s, they were painted this way. And there's 505, which is another significant number for you guys to remember. So I'm making this hard now. 324 and 505. And the old cars received this as well. And those tracks are coming out of Chestnut Street onto Draker Street. He's at what is known as Dunmore Corners, and he's going to kind of make a little loop, but cross over Blakely Street on his way into town that way. We won't go through too many numbers. You like numbers. What's significant is the bottom and the profit and loss. You know, you're starting to see in 20 and 22, they're losing some money. In fact, that was 1920 was pretty significant, $55,000. And I guess if I went farther on, I can find out if there was a major coal strike, because that would certainly affect ridership if the mines were not working for whatever reason. And there were plenty of strikes up there. By 1930, 31, 32, you know, we're now running into some real big deficits, 19,000 and 30. Then the depression's really hitting 157,000, 147,000. Then Moody's decides to change the way they do their accounting, and they no longer list a deficit. 1934 is when the system is going to change from Scranton Railway and the separate subsidiary Scranton Bus Company to the Scranton Transit Company. But take a look at the three numbers that I put in there and look at the loss as the depression continues. All the way down to 66,000. Like Pittsburgh, they had some painted cars, just not as many. And I could only imagine what this looked like in color somewhere in the 30s, and it looks quite beautiful. And it's out in front of the car barns on Providence Road. Then there was the Legionnaire car that when these groups would come into Scranton for conventions and possibly the red light district till the mid 30s, then they would paint cars up for these groups. So we're at the end of the Green Ridge suburban line. And then there was this one. These guys were here for a convention, and the company painted it up. And Ed Miller, who was a young 19-year-old in 1939 and may not have had access to a car. He may have biked up to Scranton, but he wanted a picture of this beautiful thing. It was black and white lettering, the red and white trim on the logo up in front. The cross had red and gold. It was a beautiful car, painted up for the Knights Templars convention. And Ed came out, and they rolled the car out for him, and he got a shot of this side. The other side was already being repainted in the regular colors, if there was such a thing in 1939 as regular colors. Here's a cropped photo of Lackawanna Avenue. It's a much bigger photo. It's not clear, but look at all those black automobiles. Look at all those Model Ts, and there's a couple of fancier ones out here. And it tells a story with that deficit, with mines closing, with the depression. And look at these automobiles all over. And obviously some of the coal miners that used to ride the trolley may very well have been owning an automobile. Another shot that Ed Miller should have taken differently. He should have gone over to the left and shot the car with a church that's on the right. in view because that's the church I went to, St. Michael's Eastern Orthodox Ukrainian Church. Now, 2 years, 32 to 34. The Municipal Service Company, another Insel property, has it. And this is 1941. And the line's going to go up about 8 more blocks. Then it's going to turn left or west onto Forest Street. It will end at the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Kaiser Valley car rebuilding shops. Another shot he should have done differently. This is my neighborhood, and right up here is my street. And I wish he had stood up there, but there was probably half-hour service, and he walked the Bellevue line. He took a little bit of time, 1 or 2 days only, while the company was getting ready for abandonment. And he got this shot. But there was a bondholder in 1932, mid 1932, and he sees the handwriting on the wall, and he wants the appointment of a receiver for the company, and he gets it. He's alleging, of course, insolvency. You can't. They're not going to be able to pay their $1 million bond issue, the 6% mortgage bonds, and the guy's going to lose money. There's a couple of different bonds out here. This bridge would be taken out in 1955 during Hurricane Agnes, and it would be out for a couple of years. By then, the trolley was gone, and then they would have to replace it. Here is the major construction project of 1908 when the DL&W built this beautiful station and its division offices. Just so you know what that big building is. So they appointed this Julius Levy as a receiver. And they made the receivership permanent a month later. And Harry Darts were always involved with Scranton Transit when I lived there. He had started in 1910, so he and his son were always there, and he was a manager. So, and then the president, and he became a receiver as well. And in 1934, they merged the bus subsidiary, Scranton Bus Company, and Scranton Railway Company into Scranton Transit Company. Now, here's a couple of statistics. I found a way to break all this up so you can see pictures, so this is what it's valued at, $5,836 in some. And that includes the track, the power system, the rolling stock, buildings, which would be the car barns, the land that the company, and the investment in those bridges, Lackawanna Avenue Bridge, Mulberry Street Bridge. So you can see some of that. Here's the line car, though, painted red. It'll become blue and white eventually, in front of the 1901 barn. Conveniently lined up for a fan trip. I guess the fan trip's coming over until they're going to show the work cars that they have left in 1948. The line car in the middle is the sand car, one of the old 4-wheel cars. 107, which I think came from the Gary, Indiana area, and is alive and well. It's down at the Rock Hill Trolley Museum down in Orbistonia. Now, there's the car coming outbound on South Main. It's going to turn left up to my high school, which was not shot anyway. But they had 51 steel body cars, 45 wooden body cars, 10 sweepers, and 4 other work cars. There's the other side, the non-downtown side of the Mulberry Street Bridge, and its investment was $90,000. They had an investment of $25,000 of the Lackawanna Avenue Bridge. And they had this big piece of property here, the yard, where they were going to put at one time a $300,000 car barn. And they never did. They never had the money. It was going to be a big one, a new shop, all consolidated. And it's valued at $45,000. And the other one, Carbon Street, over on my left, valued at $38,000. They're going to reorganize. December 10th, 1934 is the big day. And the bondholders see the handwriting on the wall. What can they do? And they advance $220,000, buy new buses. That's what they want. They took new securities for the old ones, and the Philadelphia Bank advanced $2.2 million in a second mortgage. Here's the system. There's what it looks like in 1934, and you only have the lines in the city by now. It's a city system only, nothing extending beyond. And this idea comes up, and I'm sure they were talking about it earlier than that. This is 1940, the beginning of 1940, and Harry Dart, the president, says, get rid of all the streetcars. We don't want them. That buses will get us out of the red. We won't have all the wire maintenance. We'll be able to go to newly developing areas. And again, take a look down the bottom. See, 1938, when the highway department wanted to build Main Avenue, he wanted to get rid of that track, but they never rebuilt it. At least not before 1942. So, and he thought it would take 3 years to buy enough buses, and it would cost $400,000 to get rid of all the rails and the ties and the poles, and they could use the money they would get from the salvage to cover that work. So he wanted to get rid of Main Avenue, Mulberry Street, which was actually some of the last lines going were on Mulberry Street. That was a steep hill, but he thought we could get rid of that, and the last to go would be Greenwich Suburban and Southside. So he was trying to get rid of a lot of heavy hills first. Now, if you look this way today, you're not going to see anything that's there except that Jersey Central freight terminal. And this really accelerated the process of abandonment of the streetcars. 1939, it's October, and the bridge, which obviously has been rebuilt again from what we saw, it's not safe for heavy loads. So now the West Side cars they could go across slow, but people had to get off and walk across the bridge and then board the cars on the other side. So very inconvenient. There's the mess that's taking place over here, waiting for their riders to walk across are these cars. And another car waiting, of course, going west, 390. One of the cars from Huntington, West Virginia, is starting to go across. So, the new bridge had no provision for tracks because the company didn't want them. They wanted to get rid of them. Here's some shots showing you what North and South Main Avenue looked like. This was South Main, and it was a nice business district, still is, with people living up above. Lafayette Street was through routed with Nativity. So a lot of these routes from west to east, they were through routed. They just didn't turn around in downtown. Hampton Street, South Main, another view from that area. And downtown. We thought we'd get rid of the trolley lines, but the war intervened, and the Office of Defense Transportation, which I've talked about in other shows, said, we got a gas crisis. You're going to keep whatever trolleys you had. They did give dispensation for the 6 lines because of the West Side lines, because the bridge had already, been partly built. And here we are looking up Wyoming at Lackawanna, and we don't have a date. I'm estimating 40, 41. There's still cars on the road, and that's why I'm saying that. And here, you think Pittsburgh had painted cars, Scranton had them too. Not as many, but they had 9 lines that would run through the war, and they had a couple of cars painted up like this. This was the most garish, I thought, with the stripes on it. And we're up here at Nayock Park, and that's the Everhart Museum, which I spent a lot of years with my grandmother going through. And then there was this guy, Back the Attack, buy the bonds. Don't just sign up, buy the bonds. And he's at the end of the Greenwich People's line on Sanderson Avenue at Greenwich Corners. So we're left with this system in 1945. Now we're going to start buying buses, right? 1947, the company has 47 streetcars. They've already got rid of Providence, 28 bus lines, 108 buses, 65 streetcars. Pretty good payroll, $1,125,000, now an 8-cent fare and for buses, and 4 tokens for 30 cents on streetcars. And they did have interchangeable transfers. Here's the first line to go. This is wonderful. Newspapers.com is full of this. They all took pictures of the last trolleys, and Providence is going to go in September of 1947. And so anything beyond the car barn is not going to go. And part of that was the rebuilding of Main Avenue. The car did run on Main Avenue when it got off of Providence Road. So you see the red up there. I haven't, a lot of the city track stayed, so I'm just going to show you that route. But from the car barn up to the city line, going through the Providence era, it's gone. September 7th, 1947. I got some shots from here. This is a nice overall shot because look from left to right. Here's the Carbon Street yard. The regular car barn is behind me, and you can see the ramp going up to the Mulberry Street Bridge. And there's the cars stored in the Providence Road yard, the sand tower, and the building that housed the dispatcher. And this was 1947. And then if you turn around, that's what you see. And there's still a stadium there today. And we're heading out Providence Road. And, this is pretty much what Providence Road looked like. There's a hill. We're up above the hill. Right up here in the back is the intersection with North Main Avenue. Here we are at North Main Avenue. And they got some of the older junk up here. They never did I see a picture of a very nice Osgood Bradley 500 series car. Never had them up here. Working class neighborhood, Providence Square. Up on the left is where the Northern Electric cars would cut off. They ran out as far as here on Scranton Railway before cutting off to go north and through the gap up to Clark Summit and beyond. It's a fan trip because it says Forest City. And yes, the Carbondale Forest City cars ran here, but not at this time. Beyond Providence Square, all residences, big houses. This is Throop Street, I believe. And then it's still somewhat residential, but it's petering out. And if you look over on the right, there's mining property there, all the mining buildings. They all have their standard vents that look so funny on top, or I thought they did. And then you, at the end of the line, again, different car, I-80 here. You can see the mine talus here. So there was a breaker in there. Viewmont Mall up on my right, up on the hill. Now Laurel Hill is going to go. That's the line out of Dunmore. That's the line that came from the old Erie Railroad shops. The one that still has a piece of private right-of-way, there it is in red over on the right. And that part of the line is going to disappear. Not Quincy Avenue. You'll see that. And here I was digging around and looking for what shot do I use? And lo and behold, I find this. It's the last day. So we even know the car, 368 on a real nasty day, February 8th, 1948. And they'll come up Chestnut Street, which is all single track. A lot of these lines were single track, and then it double tracked right here at Drinker Street. Ed Miller, he used to climb up on a lot of stuff, coal dumps, bridges, hills, and this was shot from the Erie Railroad Bridge, just giving you an idea of what Blakely Street looks like. Then I'm going to go, cold. I'm going to go on this private right-of-way. And you can still drive this area. They paved that now, so you can drive it. Right here, right behind the car, is going to be where they truncate the line for a year. So the last private right-of-way here is going to disappear. But they're going to run a car about 8 blocks from that area because Quincy Avenue is sort of taking an overload from the buses that are probably small and are coming very full out of Dunmore. So, this is going to run daily except Sunday every half hour, 6:30 to 9:30. And Quincy Avenue was all residential here. Now, this was a Laurel Hill car, just to show you what the end of the line was. They would have a crossover here. And, but I thought, gee, look at 366, it's kind of nice to see that and nice to see the paint schemes. And it gives you a better idea of what Quincy Avenue was. So it was a very heavily populated area. And that's green. So you have the red disappearing and green is going to run for a while until November 13th, 1949, about another year of streetcar operation on the inner portion. And don't forget, the inner portion here would join with the car lines to Prescott Avenue, to Petersburg up here, and also to Naog Park. Now you're up on Shanty Hill, which is called Nativity, the nicer name, November 13th, 1949. And that line's going to disappear same day. It's going away too. And that's the South Side line, actually. And its terminus is right here at Crown Avenue. And right underneath Crown Avenue is the Laurel Line Tunnel, which you can still go through today. The school is now an apartment, so it is still there. And there were 2 passing sightings on Nativity before it joined with the South Side car. And typically you saw these turtle roofed cars on the line. So now Nativity is down here, and that's gone. South Side is still running. And Quincy, of course, has been bust. So what's next? Well, looks like South Side. And there is the South Side line coming out Cedar Avenue, right to the city boundary at Bernie Avenue, coming back in where it joined Nativity. And it came over the railroad and the Laurel Line on the Spruce Street Bridge. Not very clear. Ed Miller took it. Don't ask me why it wasn't, but it's a great view because you just come out of town. Right here is the really great Coney Island hot dogs. Right here, Laurel Line Station shows up, and DL&W facilities. And here is the interchange track that DL&W trains use to get equipment and freight cars to and from the Laurel Line. And you know, all the cars south side of Nativity went out on Cedar Avenue. Nativity cars would go into Pittston and turn back a bit before they went up the hill. And Southside had this magnificent hill to go up and down. Still a beautiful view today if you drive down. And the 2 views of that bridge, the top one looking from the Cedar Avenue, Pittston Avenue side, you can see the railroad station between the end under the slide and the bridge over on the left. And there we are looking from the city side. And that track would stay there until they tore this bridge down to put interstates in. I always looked at that track. It was neat. Greenridge Peoples, remember the Peoples Street Railway? So there was Greenridge Suburban for the Suburban Railway and Greenridge Peoples, where the Greenridge Peoples cars terminated. And this was 1937 when they moved the car line over to the side because this was Greenridge Quarters and it was very busy over here. So it got cars out of the way at a curbside terminal. Well, they clunked through, and Ed didn't take too many. Everybody shot at the D&H crossing. This was only a branch line, and it was 3 tracks at Vine Street and Larch Street. There's another shot, giving you a little idea of the houses, the type of buildings that would be along there. These typical 2- and 3-story with store in the bottom. The very big typical Scranton house. This was 1941. Then he omits all that, but he does shoot this. Maybe I should play The Office again. I don't know. That tower has just been refurbished. And Lackawanna Historical Society does have a part of that building, and they're storing a lot of their material that they haven't gone through yet. There's and it's still a paper company, as I said, Scranton Paper, something like that. And then it will run into town on Penn Avenue, turn on Lackawanna, go back out Wyoming, and then turn back on Mulberry and back on Penn. Penn becomes Capouse. Scranton Times has a huge radio tower now, and they light that up every year. And with fireworks, it's kind of like being outside a football game, tailgating before it lights up. Dunmore on Blakely Street and down through a part of Dunmore and a part of Greenridge is going to go on October 8th, 1950. And of course, the last car, you know, they say in the paper it's going on the 7th, but the last car really starts running the next day on a Sunday. So this is what's all gone now. And, you know, if you're wondering, if you're looking in here, trying to figure out what's left, well, this is what's left. I made it easy for you. The 2 lines that they wanted to get rid of initially, going up Mulberry Street, and they're on the right, High Hill on both Prescott Avenue and Mulberry, and the original Greenridge Suburban line. And now cars will leave downtown. There's Wyoming Avenue. There's the Globe Store, major shopping area. This was really the center of Scranton shopping. And it wanders through town and then starts going up Mulberry Street. And that building is no longer there. I had a hell of a time trying to figure out where it was. Track maps seem to indicate it was here. But then Ed Miller had a picture and they said, yeah, this is it. Great. And there's part of the hill. We're starting to go up. Look at the big houses that Scranton had. This huge, big, beautiful homes, multiple family. And it was a very steep grade. They'd run sweepers out here in the fall because the leaves were falling down. And we go up a bit of a hill. Now at Prescott Avenue, before another steeper hill, the Prescott Avenue cars to Petersburg will make a turn. And the Naog cars will keep coming up and up. She's a much better shot than the last one. I tried to find this area for a while, but didn't realize this is all a gas station over here. And then I was able to identify it. Look at the hill up here. A lot of fun during the wintertime. You can see that. There's Prescott Avenue down in the bottom, and we're going to go all the way up to Naog Park. And this is the end of the line, and we'll sit there, and there's the Everhart Museum. And he will be on private right-of-way about 3 blocks along the park. And then he'll turn down on Olive Street and make a loop back, and he'll come in on Prescott Avenue, like right here. And there's part of the hill going up Prescott Avenue. Now, Naog almost always had 400 and 500 series cars. And so did Petersburg, although more 400s than 5s. The bottom of the hill here, you can see the hill. I wanted to show you the grade, but there's the junction, so you can see the Naog car coming back in, and then beyond that car is Petersburg chugging up his hill. Steep, slippery. This is a Petersburg car. Why is there a Greenridge Suburban sign on it? Because Petersburg and Greenridge Suburban were always through routed. But you can see the type of homes that were here. Big, heavily populated residential area. Then we get to the end of the line at Ash Street, which is right behind the car, and he sits here. And this is it. Nice, tiny business area, business block between the trolley and that tree in the background. And the end comes Sunday, June 21, 1953. And, you know, everybody's out on both of these lines, Petersburg and Naog, and the motorman, you know, the paper says, yeah, everybody's congratulating me, but I'm dutifully collecting fares. 510 was the last car, and that left at 12:05. He had badge number 1, the motorman. That was George Miller. So, you know, it was packed. It was a German band umping on the car, you know, and it's trying to get up that hill. It makes it up Mulberry Street Hill and Petersburg. And then on the way out, it's passing the Naog car, which is coming back, and they've got noisemakers and sparklers, and everybody's having a party. You know, 1,000 or more people, you know, were out there. And that was the end. So now we're left with the original line, the suburban, they call Greenridge Suburban right here. And what do we do? The company certainly doesn't want it. The company says, my gosh, telling the city we got to get rid of it because that's costing us $100 a day. We're running 3 cars in base service and probably another one in rush hour. And we want to get rid of this thing. And the city's like, you haven't told us if you're going to pave all this, pull up the rails. And until we come to an agreement, this car line runs. So it will run for another year. And here's the end of the line. That big greenhouse, green and cream house is gone, but everything else is there. And he's changing ends. It's like so many lines. There were no loops. It was all change ends. There were no single-ended cars on the line. So this is the Greenridge section, and it's all very elite and nice homes here. And there's passing siding up here on North Washington Avenue. And the houses get bigger as you go through, as you can see. As I come down up to Greenridge Street, this is North Washington and at Marion Street. This is the neighborhood that Edward Sturgis lived in. And as soon as you go by Marion Street, the whole character changes and you get away from all the hoity-toity people in Greenridge, the fairly rich people. And now you're into a working class neighborhood. You're into the industries. Your jail is down here. There's the powerhouse railroad spurs down here. This is looking outbound from the Erie Railroad Bridge. You're near Myrtle Street, and you can see the powerhouse. There's Technical High School. And you can see the nature of the buildings have changed. You're going to pass the Armory. That was the Erie Railroad going into Scranton at the station. And the station today, the inner part of that station is part of Cooper's Fish Restaurant. Pretty good food. Now, so here we are. They're haggling and they're losing $100 a day. And this car is still running, coming out of Petersburg. He's heading to Greenridge. And there is the Elm Park Methodist Church. There's a whole ton of postcards about that car, because a huge area for people to sit and a huge organ. And it's a very big church. Finally, though, they do come to an agreement, and it's December 18th, and it's 1954. So here we are, packed with passengers. There's 74-year-old James Doherty, and he was a 6-year-old when he rode the first trolley in 1886. So he's over on the right. And of course, you've got some very old veteran motormen there, 51-year service, 48-year service. So they were with the company for a long time. And I'm not going to read all this, but I put it in there and I couldn't figure out what to do with it. 68 years of electric operation. So, and there were some other veterans on there too. You know, they 4 operators on the cars, 4 cars that made the last trip, total of 202 years of service. So obviously the cars were bulging. There were 4 of them. There's a band out there too. Everybody liked to have bands when the trolleys disappeared. And now we're left with 4 cars that would be burned. 1 car you'll see survives, or 2 cars, and this guy. And he was an old Scranton 4-wheeler, and boy, that had all the possibilities of restoration, but vandals didn't think so. It was stored out in that yard, lonely. Nobody's moving through it anymore, and a bunch of kids set it on fire. And so that was the end of that. This is what's left. So now there's only track, and they'll obviously scrap that. They'll burn the 4 cars that were on the last run. And this was the car that could have been. The Lackawanna Historical Society wanted to exhibit a streetcar up in that park. They tried, while they tried to get the money, the company stored it in the back of the car house. They were very nice about that. And it took almost 2 years for the historical company to realize they weren't going to get the money. And so the company junked it early January 1956. But there's still more, because every so often I bump into this. People wonder what the hell I'm doing here taking pictures of this. Trail in the street. Well, I was very excited. Part of the Greenridge line apparently hasn't been pulled up. It's still under there as of 2015. You remember I mentioned that number 324? Well, even Ed Miller thought this guy was gone. And he ran through the war and then became surplus. And everybody thought it was scrapped until they found it as part of a diner out in the Poconos. So it has been brought back to Scranton, and ECTMA has been lovingly restoring it. And you can see it's got that 1940 paint scheme again. Beautiful. Then there's 505, which was bought by a doctor who hauled it up to Sandy Pond, New York State. And he was going to establish a rail museum, and I think he had a variety of equipment, including that Washington line car, and it wasn't taken care of well. Finally, it went down on the left. It's in the car barn in Bloomsburg. And I remember being there and talking to people, and they had parts and pieces, and it still had the front end on it, and they were going to restore it. Nice, except Hurricane Agnes hit. And right after Hurricane Agnes, the old gentleman who established this museum died. And his kids said, we don't want this thing. There's a few buildings there today, but the cars all had to disappear. And this wound up going to Railway State yesterday at that time, now the Rock Hill Trolley Museum. And it was on a flatbed when it broke down outside of Lewistown, and it stayed on that flatbed. Phil Sauerlander, you're on the you're on here, my friend from Penn State. We looked at it on the flatbed when we were wandering around looking at trains one time. I was in Penn State. So finally, the scrapyard is closing, and they said, "What do you want to do with it?" And so the museum thought Rock Hill had to think about it and said, "Yeah, we'll take it." Well, it went to Scranton then, eventually with some kind of trade, and they have been rebuilding it. It's been a long process, and but they are rebuilding it. This is in their Montage mountain car house. They put thicker sides on it. They thought the original ones were too thin. This was back, I think, in 2024. And this guy, you know, I should have a picture of this at Rock Hill Trolley Museum because he survived, and it's painted bright, beautiful yellow like they used to be. And it works and it runs. And I've actually had a chance to ride on it. But this guy here is around as well. So there are 3 pieces of Scranton equipment out there. And with that, I want to thank again Ed Miller, my dearly departed friend, who really got me started into the local electric railroading industry within Scranton. I wish I had a tape recorder with all the stuff that this guy told me. And with that, we're mercifully done. I know it was long, but I had to say everything I did. So I can't really go for trolley ride, but I'm here for questions. So
Thank you, George. That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of the people who asked questions in the chat, you actually got their questions answered. But if that is not the case, I will let everyone unmute in just a second. I don't really have much for our coming up slide here. Santa
boy, I
Trolley
did better
starts.
than I thought, Kristen. Only an
Hey!
hour and a half. Yeah, not bad.
But yeah,
Or
so
two
the
and a half,
museum's gonna,
maybe 2.5. Yeah,
oh yeah, close to two and a
or
half.
something
That's
like
okay.
that.
That's
Yeah,
okay. Well,
I'm
and I
retired.
can tell that, Scranton is your thing. Like I could
It
tell
is.
that you
It is.
really enjoyed giving this presentation. So I'm very grateful that we were able to record it. So yeah, we'll get to questions in just a moment here. Just a note for anybody planning to visit, the museum will be closed December 23rd to January 1st, but we'll reopen January 2nd. And if you have enjoyed Trolleyology this year, please consider making a donation at patrolley.org/support or joining as a member or even volunteering. That would be lots of fun. We would be very grateful for any of those things. Okay, so I'll start off. I had a question like very early on in the program about the Gravity Railroad and plane number 6. Can you talk more about that?
Well, I wish you really want to talk to Ed Metka about that. He's local.
Ah,
Um, the original railroads in there, and there were 2. There was the D&H Gravity Railroad, and then the Pennsylvania Coal Company had a gravity railroad. Okay, this is
okay.
before steam engines. Um, up through the Poconos, they had a series of inclines. They had a light track, is what they called it, and a loaded track, and they were all graded differently. So one track took you up a series of inclines, and then they went down hills and then up another incline and down. Then the light track went the other way. And this is how the original coal companies got their product out of the valley. And people also rode those. And I have a few pictures of that, but not in the show, or we would have been going till 10 probably. Those railroads would eventually be replaced in the 1840s and 50s, 60s by steam locomotives.
Okay.
And even the D&H Canal would be replaced by about 1880 or 90, somewhere in there. Nobody's really written a good book on it. But yeah, you had to have a series of grades going down one direction and grades on another track going down the other direction. And so when you got into Dunmore, that was plane number 6. They hauled
Okay.
they hauled their cars up so they can continue going east. And the shops, the gravity shops were down there.
Was this kind of like the
Breaker
Allegheny
down in
Portage Railroad at
there.
all?
Gee, I wish I knew. I wasn't around for that, but
Well,
probably. But except the Portage Railroad, I don't know if they had 2 different tracks graded in 2 different directions.
okay.
You
Uh,
know,
well, we will get on to everybody, you're welcome to turn
there's
your
a program. there's a program, the Gravity Railroad. But
Yeah, for real.
yeah,
You're welcome to turn your cameras on, by the way, everybody, if you'd like. And then also I've made it so folks are able to unmute themselves. Lots of nice comments coming in. George, great show, excellent information. And then Philip Sauerlander has a question. How long did the original Vanderpool system last before the line was converted to the conventional electric?
well, the papers, yeah, Phil, you naturally going to stick me with that one. This is my friend from Penn State. Don't forget, longtime friend. It really doesn't say, but it couldn't have lasted very long. They say that the two cars were still running in the 1890s. I did find a newspaper report for that. Okay, but there's also by 1890 these four-wheel cars are coming. So and if you're talking about the Troller, I don't think that lasted more than a year. They had already rigged up, but they had jerry rigged something to get rid of the Troller. And I suspect once Sprague's hole showed up, they were more than happy to put it on the cars. I don't think it could have lasted very long. The board of directors, from what I could tell, was the ones that wanted the Troller. Vanderpool did not want the Troller. But you have to listen to the board. They're funding it.
Interesting. Yeah, for some background.
Couldn't have lasted long, but I wish the delivery dates of the earliest cars were around, but that Linden Street barn fire destroyed all the early records. That's where they were all kept. That was the office.
I was going to tell everybody who's still on here that I did get I don't know, probably about half a dozen emails asking wait, I thought Richmond was the first electric.
Go into newspapers.com. You're going to see November 1886 and you'll see November 1887. And at least my Scranton education tells me 1886 comes before 1887. But don't forget, Sprague made a number of very important improvements. He got the motors from the front of the car underneath. He developed a far better pole, which became universal. So he made significant contributions. It just wasn't the first system. Now, my understanding is that the original Richmond system had a lot of problems with their motors, and Edison was working overtime trying to fix all that. And I think both Edison and Sprague were a little mouthy. They boasted.
Yeah.
So
I think it's Richmond is the first successful. You got to stick that word in.
Well, Scranton was still running. They never stopped running that system.
Yeah.
And those cars were still running in the 1890s. So,
yeah.
Well,
but I'm not saying you guys weren't the first. They usually stick the word successful with. That depends on how you want to define successful, George.
Well, I've never seen newspaper articles that say we have a lot of problems. So I suspect it was running well. But, traction fans, they believe in fake news. So I know that we were the first, and that line continued to run nonstop until December 18th, 1854 or 1954, excuse me.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the Stourbridge line at one time was saying, we're the birthplace of American railroading. And people are wondering, how is that possible? Well, they didn't really say that they had the first locomotive, because when it started in Baltimore, of course, that's where railroad's starting. But of course, it started with the horse. Stourbridge had a locomotive, but it was short-lived, unfortunately. And then where was another? Yeah. So that's what happened.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Any questions for George? And if you can't turn your video on and you want to, it's probably because I turned it off at the beginning. So if you would like to turn it on and you can't, just let me know.
Yeah, George, a comment. Everybody says the problem in World War II is a gasoline shortage. There is no gasoline shortage. There's a shortage of rubber tires. So they call it a gasoline shortage. But the reason why they don't want buses is because they run on rubber tires and there isn't any rubber around, because we've lost Southeast Asia and they've gone to making, I'll call it artificial substitute rubber. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
So it always bugs me when they say that, because there's plenty of gasoline. There's just no rubber tires around.
Well, I think you're right, and I should know because I did the World War II show, but I was just working too hard. Kristen knows I was putting it. My last slide went in at 6:45, and
It's okay, Georgie. You did a
but
tremendous show,
um,
far beyond anybody else's ability to do.
but you know what? They had to get a pipeline in to the East Coast because the German U-boats were sinking tankers. I mean, Kristen could be on the beach and a tanker would blow up. So for a little while there was a shortage, but that didn't last. And you're right, rubber was really the biggest consideration. And I have a cartoon and in a newspaper, and of course it's a very racist cartoon because we're fighting the Japanese, and it shows all this rubber, and there's a Japanese soldier standing on top of it with his bayonet, and you know the stereotypical face that you would see from pictures from that point of view. And so yeah, thanks very much for reminding me, and I'll fix that tonight.
There's a replica of the Stourbridge line in the Wayne County Historical Society on display, and it's a full-size replica, so it's something to see. And also the you mentioned about the gravity railroads that ran basically over Moosic Mountain and connected to the canals, the D&H Canal in Honesdale.
D&H went to Hawley. Well, yeah, Hawley
and also in Hawley, yeah. And so that was quite a network that was part of that whole system. And but anyway, Wayne County Historical Society in Honesdale has a great deal of information on both the canal and the gravity railroads. And so I recommend that you look there. Very fine museum.
No, thank you. That'll be on my list.
Yeah.
Oh, really? No, it will be.
My great grandfather was a lock tender on the canal. Just at White Mills, between White Mills and Indian Orchard, lock 32 West. And so he was familiar with that territory.
All right. Any other questions for George? George, I don't know what program of yours we're going to host next, but I know you still have a number of them, right?
Well, I probably can find some things, yeah.
Okay, good. Awesome. Yeah, I forgot to mention at the beginning, I don't remember if you mentioned this either, George, but I try to tell people, like, don't worry about reading all of the text on your slides because you're going to talk about it.
The reason I put text on is twofold. And, one is because for me, my brain doesn't work like it used to, and it's a nice little cheat sheet. But the more important reason is I'm not going to be around. Unlike a lot of rail fans, I know I'm not going to be around forever. But this program, if somebody else wants to do it, has all of the text they need to follow along and realize what I was trying to get at. So I'm thinking down the road here, not just a bunch of pictures.
We are very grateful for that.
Incidentally, also, the cars that were used there, the little brill liners or whatever they were called.
Oh, the electromobiles, yeah.
Electromobiles, excuse me, yeah. They ran on the Queensboro Bridge, and one of those cars is preserved at the New York Trolley Museum in Kingston, New York, just like the car that's in your background there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not in good shape, however.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, Altoona had them. None of them survived. Youngstown had, I believe, a few, but they didn't survive. So,
yeah, I think that's the only.
Because eventually we'll see one run. I hope. I hope I'm still able to drive by the time they can get around to finish it.
All righty. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up
Before you
there.
wrap it up, Christine,
Yes.
what's the status of the terrible trolley?
Oh, yes. So they're still working on it actively. In fact, almost every week in our newsletter, we're calling for another work party for it because right now it is being prepared for painting. We don't have an exact timeline on that, but they're like basically smoothing out the exterior and the interior to prepare it for painting. They've like uncovered some, like, for example, right near the headlight on the front, it was dented in at some point and then just like covered over with Bondo. And so there's like, it's like 3 inches thick of Bondo right next to the headlight. So there's all sorts of interesting surprises, but it's really cool because as they like smooth down the exterior, like you can see just all the different levels of paint, like, you know, all the different, it's like archaeology, right? Because you can see like all the different colors it's been painted throughout the years.
So if
So-
I,
Program.
Don't
I
forget,
come
Kristen,
up in the-
government funded Bondo.
so
Say
it's
what?
gonna run sometime in 2025?
We hope so. That's the plan.
Good.
So you never, I mean, yeah, that is the plan.
Yeah, there was a lot of salt, corrosion on that, particularly on the
Mhm.
step wells and, you know,
Yeah.
Pittsburgh likes to use salt. And, you don't really want to restore a car, but then, you know, it looks good, but then you fall through the steps.
Right.
So, you know, we'll
Yeah, the floor is
get it
back
done.
in.
Correctly, and then hopefully we'll never have to do it again,
Yeah, exactly. Yep, yep.
because it will be stored undercover.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of what else has been done recently. They put the floor back in. There's gonna be soon, if you're watching this on YouTube soon, we're in November 2024 now. We're gonna, I believe, have a kind of a buy a seat campaign where that'll help fund the reupholstery of some of the seats. So those are getting sent out shortly. But I'm not the expert on the project. Maybe that should be a Trolleyology, like an update on the car, because
Yeah,
it's
there we go.
you guys know this because you're in the business, but to like the average person, it kind of looks like we haven't done anything on the car in the past year, even though they've been working on it like almost every day. So you know how it is. Like it's hard. It's easy to like when it first arrives to like drum up press and everything. And then after it's been kind of being worked on for a while and like you don't see any like visual changes, like it's hard to be like, look, we're like getting so much closer because like the average person doesn't actually see that.
Yeah.
And Larissa just mentioned in the comments, so much wiring work has been done as well. So they've been doing a lot of testing with that.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, I
yeah.
remember riding those cars, in the winter of '77, which was absolutely horrible. And you know what? There was no heat in those cars because the heating ducts had all rusted away. So, I mean, among other things, yeah. I mean, the Port Authority toward the end was basically saying, look, they're only going to run a few years. You know, how much money do we really want to put into these cars? You know, because if it goes bad, well, then we'll just haul it into the shop and fix it. That wasn't the case with the one that ran through the tunnel, of course, where the brakes went and it went crashing into Station Square. But
I think that would be an excellent program to have once that car is finished, because I've
Yeah.
seen it. It's a work in process. It's an art
Yeah.
in process.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
going to
and-
be it's going to be interesting to watch it be painted because the museum does have permission from the Steelers to use the logo. And what I heard from Scott Becker last year was one of the guys that had done the painting was willing to work with us.
Yes, Chester
repaint it again.
Zagowski. Yep.
I would love to see that film, Christine. I'd love to see that work done.
All right. Yeah. The project manager on it right now, his name is Michael Bukta, and he is working really hard. He's only like, I think he's 22 or 23.
Yeah,
So
young.
he's young and has lots of energy. And
He's got muscles and he can lift things. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Good.
So yeah, we're like way off topic now, but yeah, we'll keep everybody updated. So
That would be an interesting topic if you could get Mike to do that though.
yeah.
Because Charles, you're about the 1,100,000 person that has come down to the museum and asked, where's this terrible trolley? And you know, this Steeler country.
And this young lady walked me over there, got me in the door, and they greeted me with open arms and tried to hand me something to work with.
Yeah, it's a trolley museum. That's always been the case, right?
Of
Yes.
course.
Yeah.
All righty. We're so far off topic. It's all very interesting, but I'm going to wrap it up here because it is already late. Thank
Yeah.
you all for coming. Thank you so much, George, for presenting. We will see everybody in 2025.
Kristen, can you get me I can't read all the chat now, but can you get me a copy of the chat?
Absolutely. I will
can
do that.
peruse later. Yeah, you don't have to
All
do
right.
it tonight.
Bye, everybody.
All righty,
Bye,
bye guys.
thank you.
Thanks.